Sometimes the most powerful bond between a parent and child isn't blood. It's the willingness to sacrifice everything when a little one needs you most. In the lawless frontier town of Redemption Creek, a towering stranger called the Viking keeps to himself, hiding from a past he'd rather forget. When a gang of ruthless outlaws threatens a helpless orphan girl in the dusty town square, she breaks free and runs crying to the only person who looks strong enough to protect her. She throws her arms around him and sobs, "Papa," though they've never met before. Now this hardened mountain man must choose: walk away to protect his secrets, or stand against the deadliest men in the territory to save an innocent child. What makes a stranger become a father in a single heartbeat? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The summer of 1878 came to the Wyoming Territory with a vengeance, baking the earth until it cracked like old leather and turning the air thick enough to chew. Redemption Creek sat in a shallow valley between two ridges of pine-covered hills, a collection of wooden buildings that looked like they'd been thrown together by men in a hurry to strike it rich and move on. Most of them had done exactly that when the silver played out 3 years back, leaving behind a town that was half empty and wholly forgotten by any law worth the name. Eric Thornson stood at the edge of his property, watching the sun climb over the eastern ridge. He was a big man, standing well over 6 feet, with shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway and hands that looked like they'd been carved from oak. His hair, once golden like summer wheat, had faded to the color of winter straw, shot through with silver that caught the early light. Deep lines framed his eyes and mouth, not from laughter, but from years of squinting into sun and wind and things he'd rather not remember. His face was weathered and angular, all hard planes and sharp edges, like the mountains themselves had claimed him as one of their own. Most folks in town called him the Viking on account of his size and the Scandinavian accent that still colored his words, though he'd been in America for near on 20 years. He never corrected them, never told them his real name. Eric had learned long ago that the less people knew about you, the less they could use against you when the world decided to turn mean. His cabin sat a half-mile from town proper, tucked against the tree line, where the pines grew thick and the shadows ran deep. It was a solid structure, built with his own hands from logs he'd cut and chinked himself. One room served for everything he needed: a bed in the corner, a stove for cooking and heat, a table and single chair, shelves lined with a few books he'd read so many times the pages were soft as cloth. It wasn't much, but it was his, and more importantly, it was quiet. The quiet was what Eric had come here for 5 years ago, driving a wagon with all his worldly possessions and a heart so broken he wasn't sure it still beat proper. He'd told himself he was looking for a fresh start, but that was a lie. What he'd really come looking for was a place to disappear, and Redemption Creek had obliged him admirably. His daily routine rarely varied. Up with the sun, coffee black and strong enough to wake the dead, then outside to tend the small vegetable garden he kept. Potatoes, carrots, beans, simple things that grew without much fuss. A few chickens scratched around the yard, providing eggs and the occasional Sunday dinner. Once a month, he'd hitch his horse and ride into town for supplies: flour, salt, coffee, ammunition. He'd speak only as much as necessary to Mr. Chen at the general store. Maybe nod to Maggie O'Brien if she was sweeping the boardwalk outside her saloon, then head back to his solitude. The town itself had shrunk to maybe 200 souls, most of them too stubborn or too poor to go elsewhere. Main Street ran a quarter-mile through the center, flanked by buildings in various states of despair. The Gold Dust Saloon anchored the north end, Maggie's domain, where miners and ranch hands drank away their wages and told lies about the silver boom days. Across from it sat the general store, run by Chen Wei, a Chinese immigrant who'd stayed after the railroad work dried up. His store smelled of tobacco, leather, and the exotic spices he ordered from San Francisco. Down the street stood the blacksmiths, shop, currently run by a surly German named Klaus, who did decent work when he wasn't drunk. Next to that was the assayer's office, closed now for 3 years, with dusty windows like blind eyes. The church had a leaning steeple, and a minister who came through once a month if he remembered. At the south end of town sat the orphanage, a grim 2-story structure that housed the unwanted children of folks who died or moved on, run by a widow named Mrs. Hendricks, whose smile was as rare as rain in August. Sheriff Dalton kept an office next to the saloon, though most folks knew he kept his badge polished and his courage hidden. He was a political appointment from back when Redemption Creek had aspirations, and he'd stayed because the pay was steady and nobody expected much from him. A soft man gone to fat, with nervous eyes that darted away from direct questions. Eric had measured him the first time they met and found him wanting in every way that mattered. But Maggie O'Brien, now there was a woman cut from different cloth. She'd come west with a husband who promptly died of cholera, leaving her a saloon and a will to survive that would shame most men. Somewhere in her 40s, with auburn hair going grey and green eyes that saw through pretense like it was window glass. She ran her establishment with an iron hand wrapped in velvet, serving drinks and keeping order with equal efficiency. She was one of the few people in town Eric actually respected, and one of the fewer still who seemed to see past his walls. "You're running from something," she'd told him once, about a year after he'd arrived. They'd been standing on her porch, him waiting for his monthly order of coffee beans she had shipped special. "Most folks out here are," he'd replied. "Most folks don't look like they're carrying around their own tombstone." She'd studied him with those sharp eyes. "Whatever it was, Eric, it's eating you from the inside. One day you'll have to either feed it or starve it. Can't do both forever." He hadn't answered her then, just took his coffee and left. But her words had stayed with him, echoing in the quiet of his cabin during the long nights when sleep wouldn't come. The thing was, Maggie wasn't wrong. Eric did carry weight, the kind that bent a man's spine and dulled his eyes. Beneath his shirt, hidden against his chest, hung a silver locket on a thin chain. He touched it constantly without thinking, a gesture so habitual his fingers found it in his sleep. Inside that locket was a photograph, faded and creased from years of handling, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, a little girl, maybe 5 years old, with blonde braids and gap-toothed grin. His wife Anna, his daughter Clara, both dead these 10 years. Eric forced his mind away from that path. It led nowhere good, just circles of guilt and rage and sorrow so deep it had no bottom. Instead, he focused on the present moment. The smell of pine sap warming in the sun, the distant sound of the blacksmith's hammer, the way the light caught on the creek that gave the town its name. From his vantage point, he could see most of Redemption Creek spread out below. On Saturdays, the town came alive with ranchers and their families coming in for supplies and socializing. Children would run through the streets, their laughter carrying on the wind. Eric always found himself watching them from a distance, these small humans with their boundless energy and uncomplicated joy. Something in his chest ached when he saw them, a pain so familiar it had become part of him, like an old injury that flared up with changes in weather. He never approached the children, never spoke to them. The idea of getting close to a child again, of allowing that vulnerability back into his life, terrified him more than any gunfight or grizzly bear. So he watched from afar, a lonely giant, who kept his heart locked away where it couldn't be broken again. What Eric didn't know, what he couldn't know as he stood there in the morning sun, was that his carefully constructed solitude was about to be shattered, that the very thing he feared most was coming for him, wrapped in a worn calico dress and clutching a rag doll. But for now, in this moment, he was still alone, still safe in his isolation. He touched the locket beneath his shirt, a gesture of remembrance and penance, and turned back toward his cabin. There was wood to split, and a fence that needed mending. Work was good, Work kept the memories at bay. The town of Redemption Creek drowsed in the heat, unaware that trouble was riding closer with every passing hour. Out past the eastern ridge, in a camp hidden among the rocks, a group of men sat around a fire. They were hard-faced and well-armed, the kind of men who made their living on the wrong side of the law. Their leader was a lean, wolf-like man named Silas Garrick, and he was studying a hand-drawn map of the surrounding territory. This redemption, Greek, one of his men asked, it worth the trouble? Garrick smiled, though the expression held no warmth. Every town's worth the trouble if you know what you're looking for. And I've got word, there's a certain someone there who might interest our employer. Big man, keeps to himself, Scandinavian type. What's special about him? That's what we're going to find out. Garrick folded the map and stood. We ride in tomorrow. Let's see what this dying little town has to offer. Back in Redemption Creek, Eric split logs until the sun reached its peak, then washed up and ate a simple lunch of bread and cheese. The afternoon stretched ahead of him, empty and predictable, exactly the way he preferred it. He sat on his porch with a cup of coffee, letting his mind drift. This was his life now, simple, solitary, safe. No attachments, no obligations, no chances for the universe to reach down and tear his heart out again. He'd made peace with loneliness because loneliness couldn't hurt him the way love had, or so he told himself. The locket rested against his heart, warm from his body heat, holding the faces of the family he'd failed to protect. Every morning he woke to their memory. Every night he carried them into his dreams. They were his constant companions, his ghosts, his penance. I'm sorry, he whispered to them, words he'd spoken 1,000 times before. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. The wind rustled through the pines, carrying no answer, no forgiveness. Just the eternal silence of the dead. Eric closed his eyes and let the afternoon sun warm his face. Tomorrow was Saturday. He'd need to go into town for supplies. A simple trip in and out, speaking to no one more than necessary. His monthly routine, predictable and safe. He had no way of knowing that tomorrow would be the day everything changed. That a little girl with frightened eyes would run to him calling him Papa, and in doing so, would crack open the armor he'd spent 10 years building around his heart. For now, he sat in his solitude, a man hiding from life, waiting without knowing it for life to find him anyway. The evening came on soft and purple, the way it did in the high country. Eric made himself a simple supper, fried potatoes and an egg from his chickens, and ate standing at his window, watching the last light fade from the valley. Down in town, lamps began to glow in windows, tiny points of warmth against the gathering dark. He could see the saloon, bright and noisy, even from this distance. Could imagine Maggie moving between tables with her practiced grace, keeping the peace and pouring drinks in equal measure. Sometimes Eric wondered what it would be like to be part of that world again. To sit among people, to share stories and laughter, to feel the simple warmth of human connection. But the thought always brought pain close behind it, and he'd learned to shut such wonderings down before they could take root. He washed his dishes and sat at his table with one of his books, a collection of Norse sagas his father had given him before he'd left the old country. The words were familiar as prayers, stories of warriors and heroes, of honor and sacrifice. His father used to say that the old gods might be gone, but the old values remained: courage, loyalty, protection of the weak. Eric had believed that once, had built his whole life around those values, and look where it got you. A bitter voice whispered in his mind. Your family dead, your career destroyed, hiding in the mountains like a wounded animal. He closed the book and rubbed his eyes. The darkness outside was complete now, the kind of thick mountain darkness that seemed to have weight. An owl called from somewhere in the pines, hunting. Life and death, played out every night in the wilderness. Simple, honest, no false promises or broken oaths. Eric stood and moved to the small trunk at the foot of his bed. He kept it locked, though no one ever came here to pry. Inside were the remnants of his former life, a badge, tarnished now, a rifle with custom engravings, papers and documents he couldn't bring himself to destroy, but couldn't bear to look at. And beneath it all, wrapped in oilcloth, a set of wanted posters from years ago, his own face staring back at him from the faded paper. Not wanted for crimes, but wanted for justice. Marshal Eric Thornton, they'd called him. The federal lawman who'd brought order to 3 territories, who'd never lost a prisoner or backed down from a fight. They'd called him a hero once, before he'd failed so completely that hero seemed like a word from a foreign language. He locked the trunk without removing anything and prepared for bed. Sleep would be slow in coming, it always was, but eventually exhaustion would claim him. And with it would come the dreams, the same ones that had haunted him for a decade. Anna's face, Clara's laughter, the smell of smoke and the sound of screaming. He lay in the darkness, one hand wrapped around the locket, and waited for tomorrow to come. In town, the orphanage stood dark and silent. Behind its walls, 18 children slept in narrow beds, their dreams troubled by the harsh realities of their days. Mrs. Hendricks believed in discipline above all else. Spare the rod, spoil the child, she was fond of saying. The children were fed enough to keep them working, clothed enough to avoid scandal, and loved not at all. In a corner bed on the 2nd floor, a small girl with brown hair and eyes like a frightened deer clutched a rag doll to her chest. Her name was Lucy, though Mrs. Hendricks usually just called her girl or you there. She was 6 years old and had been at the orphanage for 2 years, ever since her parents' wagon had overturned in a creek crossing. She could still remember her mother's laugh, her father's strong hands lifting her high in the air. But those memories grew dimmer every day, like stars fading at dawn. Lucy had learned to be quiet, to make herself small and unnoticeable. That was how you survived in Mrs. Hendricks' house. The woman had a switch she kept by the door and a temper that flared at the smallest infraction. The children worked from dawn to dusk, scrubbing floors, washing clothes, tending the small garden out back. School was a luxury reserved for children with families who cared. Tomorrow was Saturday, which meant Mrs. Hendricks would take 2 of the older children into town for the weekly shopping. Lucy had overheard the woman talking to her assistant. They'd be taking the orphans to help carry supplies. Lucy had been chosen. She didn't want to go. Going into town meant more work, more opportunities to make mistakes and earn punishment. But there was no refusing Mrs. Hendricks. The girl squeezed her doll tighter and whispered a prayer her mother had taught her long ago. Keep me safe through the dark night. Bring me safely to morning light. It didn't work. She never felt safe, but saying the words made her feel closer to the mother she was slowly forgetting. Down in the saloon, Maggie O'Brien wiped down her bar and counted the day's earnings. It had been a decent night, no fights to break up, no one drunk enough to need throwing out. She was about to close when the door opened, and Mr. Chen stepped in. His face troubled. "Maggie," he said quietly, "now I need to tell you something." She poured him a whiskey without asking. Chen was a tea drinker normally, so if he wanted alcohol, something was wrong. "What is it?" "I had a customer today passing through. Prospector type heading east. He said there's talk in Blackstone, that's 2 days' ride from here, about a gang moving through the territory." "There's always gangs moving through," Maggie said. But her hand had stopped moving on the bar. Not like this one. Led by a man named Garrick. Silas Garrick. You heard of him? She had. Everyone in the territory had heard of Silas Garrick. He was the kind of outlaw who left bodies behind, the kind who enjoyed cruelty for its own sake. What would he want with Redemption Creek? "We've got nothing worth stealing. Maybe he's just passing through." "Maybe not." Chen sipped his whiskey. "I thought you should know." "Thought maybe we should tell the sheriff," Maggie snorted. "Dalton!" "He'd probably hide under his desk and hope Garrick doesn't notice him." "What about the Viking?" "Eric?" Maggie's expression softened slightly. "Eric's got his own demons. I won't drag him into town troubles unless I have to." She paused. "But you're right to tell me." "I'll keep my ears open. We hear anything more, we'll figure out what to do." Chen nodded and finished his drink. After he left, Maggie locked the door and climbed the stairs to her room above the saloon. She didn't sleep well that night. Her mind turning over possibilities, none of them good. The moon rose high over Redemption Creek, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. In his cabin on the hill, Eric finally slept, his hand still wrapped around the locket. In the orphanage, Lucy dreamed of her lost parents. In the saloon, Maggie stared at her ceiling and worried. And somewhere out in the darkness, Silas Garrick's gang made their camp and planned their approach. Tomorrow was Saturday. The town would be busy with families and commerce. Guards down, attention scattered. Perfect timing for men who lived by taking what others had worked for. Perfect timing for the moment when an isolated giant and a terrified child would find each other across a crowded square. And in that finding would change each other's lives forever. The stage was set. The players were in position. All that remained was for dawn to break and the day to unfold, according to its own inexorable logic. The logic that says some meetings are written in the stars, some bonds forged by fate itself, and some men, no matter how far they run, can never truly escape who they were meant to be. Saturday morning broke clear and bright, the kind of day that promised warmth without the oppressive heat that would come later in summer. Eric woke before dawn, as was his habit, and went through his morning routine with the mechanical precision of long practice. Coffee, wash, feed the chickens, check the garden. By the time the sun cleared the eastern ridge, he'd hitched his horse to the small wagon he used for supply runs and was ready to head into town. The horse, a solid bay gelding he'd named Storm, knew the route well enough to walk it without guidance. Eric sat on the wagon seat, reins loose in his hands, and watched the landscape roll by. The trail wound down from his property through stands of pine and aspen, following the creek for part of the way before emerging onto the main road that led into Redemption Creek. Other wagons and riders appeared as he got closer to town. Ranchers and their families, a few solitary cowboys, old Samuel the carpenter, with his buckboard loaded with lumber. Main Street was already bustling when Eric arrived. He tied Storm to the hitching post outside Chen's general store and stepped down from the wagon. The familiar sounds and smells of market day surrounded him. Horses stamping and snorting, the ring of the blacksmith's hammer, women's voices raised in gossip and negotiation, children's laughter and the occasional shout. Eric kept his head down and moved toward the store, nodding briefly to those who greeted him, but not stopping to talk. He had his list mentally prepared. Flour, coffee, sugar, salt, a few other staples. In and out quickly, that was the plan. It was always the plan. Mr. Chen was behind his counter, weighing out tobacco for a customer. He caught Eric's eye and nodded, a gesture that carried some extra weight. Eric filed it away. Chen wasn't one to show concern without reason, but he continued with his shopping first. No sense borrowing trouble before it arrived. He was loading a sack of flour into his wagon when the sound of multiple horses coming fast made him pause. 12 riders swept into town from the South Road, moving with the kind of coordinated purpose that spoke of military training or something close to it. They weren't wearing uniforms, but they didn't need to. Everything about them, from the way they sat their horses to the tied-down guns on their hips, proclaimed them dangerous. The town seemed to hold its breath. Conversations died mid-sentence. People started moving toward the edges of the street, getting out of the way without making it obvious that's what they were doing. Eric recognized the pattern. He'd seen it before, in other towns, other times. This was what happened when predators entered a space full of prey. The riders pulled up in the center of town, right in front of the saloon. Their leader was a lean man in his 30s, dark-haired and clean-shaven, with eyes that assessed everything and everyone with cold calculation. He wore a long duster despite the warmth, and Eric could see the outline of at least 2 pistols underneath. When he smiled, it was the smile of a man who enjoyed other people's fear. "Well now," the man said, his voice carrying easily across the square. "Redemption Creek, not much to look at, is it, boys?" His men laughed, but it was forced laughter, the kind subordinates give when their boss makes a joke. Eric studied them more carefully now. Hard men, yes, but not all of one piece. Some looked like experienced gunfighters. Others seemed younger, trying to project toughness they hadn't quite earned. A mixed crew, then. Dangerous, but potentially unpredictable. Sheriff Dalton emerged from his office, moving with obvious reluctance. "Can I help you gentlemen with something?" The leader turned his cold smile on the sheriff. "Gentlemen, I like that. Shows respect." He swung down from his horse with fluid grace. "Name's Garrick, Silas Garrick. You might have heard of me." Dalton had gone pale. "Mr. Garrick, welcome to Redemption Creek. Is there, some business we can help you with?" "Business. That's a good word for it." Garrick looked around the square, his gaze taking in the watching townspeople. "We're just passing through, Sheriff. Thought we'd stop for some refreshment, maybe some supplies." "That going to be a problem?" "No, no problem at all. The saloon's open, and Mr. Chen's store has whatever you might need." "Excellent." Garrick gestured to his men. "You heard the man, boys. Let's sample the local hospitality." The riders dismounted and began spreading out, some heading for the saloon, others wandering the street with the casual arrogance of men who knew no one would challenge them. Eric noticed how they moved, always keeping sightlines clear, always positioning themselves to cover each other. This wasn't just a gang. This was something organized, something with discipline. He turned back to his wagon, intending to finish loading and leave. Whatever trouble Garrick and his men were planning to cause, it wasn't Eric's concern. He'd given up being concerned about other people's problems a long time ago. That was when he saw the girl. She was walking down the street with Mrs. Hendricks and another older child, a boy of maybe 12. Lucy carried a basket that looked too heavy for her small frame, struggling to keep up with Mrs. Hendricks's brisk pace. Her face was pinched with effort, and something else. Fear, Eric realized. The child was afraid. Mrs. Hendricks was focused on her own concerns, snapping at the children to hurry up, not noticing or caring that one of Garrick's men had taken an interest in her charges. The outlaw was young, maybe 20, with a patchy beard and the kind of face that probably looked mean even when he smiled. He stepped into Mrs. Hendricks' path, forcing her to stop. Well, he said. "What have we here? You running some kind of auction, lady?" "These are orphans from my care, Mrs." Hendricks said stiffly. "We're here for supplies. Please step aside." "Orphans, huh? Nobody to miss 'em if they disappeared?" The young outlaw grinned. "That one there's kind of pretty." He pointed at Lucy. Mrs. Hendricks drew herself up. "I'll thank you to mind your manners, sir. These children are under my protection." The outlaw's grin widened. "Your protection? That's funny." He reached out toward Lucy. The girl dropped her basket and stumbled backward, her eyes wide with terror. The rag doll she'd been clutching fell to the dirt. The outlaw laughed and bent to pick it up, dangling it in front of her. "This yours, little girl? Maybe I'll keep it. What do you think about that?" "Jake." Garrick's voice cut across the square like a whip crack. The young outlaw, Jake, turned, still holding the doll. Garrick had stopped on the saloon steps and was watching the scene with mild interest. "What are you doing?" "Just having some fun, boss. This lady's got orphans here. Thought maybe—" "I don't care what you thought. We're here for business, not to terrorize children." Garrick's tone was almost bored, but there was steel underneath. "Give the girl her doll back and leave them alone." Jake's face showed disappointment mixed with resentment, but he tossed the doll toward Lucy. It landed in the dirt at her feet. She scrambled to pick it up, clutching it to her chest. Mrs. Hendricks, perhaps emboldened by Garrick's intervention, made a tactical error. "Come along, children," she said loudly. "We have shopping to do, and we don't need to waste time with riffraff." The temperature in the square seemed to drop 10 degrees. Garrick's mild expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. "Riff-raff," he repeated softly. "That's an interesting choice of words, ma'am." "I only meant—" "I know what you meant." Garrick stepped down from the saloon porch and walked toward Mrs. Hendricks with deliberate slowness. "See, the thing is, I was going to let you and your little orphans go on about your business, but then you had to go and be disrespectful." He stopped a few feet away. "Now I'm thinking maybe Jake had the right idea. Maybe we should teach these children some manners, starting with showing proper respect to their betters." Mrs. Hendricks was backpedaling now, literally and figuratively. I apologize. I spoke hastily. Please, we'll just go. Jake, Garrick said without turning around. You wanted the girl. Take her. Jake's face lit up. He moved toward Lucy, who stood frozen with fear. Mrs. Hendricks made a weak sound of protest, but didn't physically intervene. The older boy beside Lucy looked ready to run, and that was when Eric's world narrowed to a single point of clarity. He saw Lucy standing there, clutching her rag doll, her face white with terror. He saw Jake reaching for her, saw Garrick watching with that cold smile. He saw the whole town frozen in place, afraid to act, afraid to speak, and he saw Clara. Not literally. Eric knew the difference between past and present, between memory and reality. But in that moment, Lucy's face superimposed itself over the memory of his daughter's face. The same age, the same helpless fear, the same desperate need for someone, anyone, to stand between her and the cruelty of the world. Eric had failed Clara. He'd been too far away, too late, too slow. He'd arrived to find her already gone, along with his wife, along with everything that mattered. He'd carried that failure for 10 years, like a stone in his chest. He wouldn't fail again. His body moved before his mind fully processed the decision. 3 long strides carried him across the distance between his wagon and the scene unfolding in the square. His voice, when it came, was low and calm and absolutely without compromise. "Don't hurt that child. I'll take her." The square went silent. Every eye turned to Eric. He stood between Jake and Lucy now, a wall of muscle and determination. Jake looked up at him. Eric had a good 6 inches and 50 pounds on the younger man, and his hand dropped toward his gun. "Back away, old man," Jake said, trying to sound tough. "This ain't your business. I'm making it my business." Eric didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. "The child comes with me. You can walk away or I can put you down. Your choice." Garrick laughed, a sound of genuine amusement. "Well now, looks like Redemption Creek has some spine after all." He studied Eric with professional interest. "You know who I am?" "Don't particularly care." "You should. I'm Silas Garrick, and these are my men. There's 12 of us and 1 of you. The math doesn't work in your favor, friend. I'm not your friend." Eric's hands hung loose at his sides, but every line of his body spoke readiness. "And I don't care if there's 100 of you. The girl doesn't go with him. That's the end of it." For a long moment, Garrick just looked at him. Then he threw back his head and laughed again. "I'll be damned." "You actually mean it," he waved Jake back. "Stand down. Let's see where this goes." Jake stepped back reluctantly. Garrick walked closer to Eric, studying him the way a man might study an interesting specimen. "What's your name?" "None of your concern." "People around here call him the Viking," someone said from the crowd. Eric didn't turn to see who. "The Viking," Garrick repeated. "Big fellow like you, I can see why. Tell me something, Viking. What's this girl to you?" "She's a child who needs protecting. Noble. I respect that." Garrick's smile never touched his eyes. "But here's the thing. You just disrespected me in front of my men in this whole town. I can't let that stand. So we're going to make a deal, you and me? I'm listening. You want the girl? Fine, I'll let you have her. But it's going to cost you. I hear you got some land up in those hills. Nice cabin, good water. Sign over the deed to me and throw in that bay horse of yours and we're square." "That's extortion," Mr. Chen called out. "That's business," Garrick corrected. "What do you say, Viking? Your property for 1 orphan nobody gives a damn about?" Eric looked down at Lucy. She was staring up at him with huge eyes, the rag doll pressed against her chest. In that moment, she looked so much like Clara, it made his chest ache. "Deal," he said quietly. Garrick's eyebrows rose. "Just like that? You don't want to think about it?" "Nothing to think about." Eric turned his attention back to the outlaw leader. "But you and your men leave town afterward, today, and you don't come back. Bold words from a man who's got no leverage. That's my condition. You want my land, you leave this town alone." Garrick considered this, then shrugged. "Fair enough. We were just passing through anyway. You can bring the papers to the saloon in an hour. We'll make it all legal and proper." He turned away, then paused. "Oh, and Viking, if you're thinking about trying something brave and stupid, I've got men watching every approach to this town. You run, we'll find you, and we'll burn your cabin to the ground just for spite. I'm not running. No, Garrick said thoughtfully. I don't think you are. Which makes you either very brave or very stupid. Maybe both. He walked back to the saloon, his men following. Eric stood alone in the middle of the square with Lucy. The girl hadn't moved, still frozen in place. Slowly, very slowly, Eric crouched down so he was at her eye level. Are you all right? He asked gently. Lucy's response was to drop her doll and throw herself at him, her small arms wrapping around his neck as she burst into tears. Her voice, muffled against his shoulder, broke his heart into pieces. Papa, she sobbed. Papa, don't let them take me. Eric's arms came up automatically, cradling the small body against his chest. He could feel her shaking, could feel the desperate strength in her grip. The word echoed in his mind. Papa. She'd called him Papa. Mrs. Hendricks found her voice. Now see here, you can't just... Ma'am? Maggie O'Brien had appeared from somewhere, her face set in hard lines. I'd suggest you take your other charge and finish your shopping quietly. This is none of your concern anymore. Those children are my responsibility. That child, Maggie pointed at Lucy, just chose her own family, and given what I know about your orphanage, I'd say she chose well. Maggie's voice dropped to something dangerous. You want to argue it? We can discuss how exactly you care for the children in your custody. I'm sure the territorial authorities would be interested. Mrs. Hendricks's face went through several colors before settling on red. She grabbed the older boy's arm and stalked off toward the general store without another word. Eric stood, still holding Lucy. She'd stopped crying but hadn't let go. He could feel every person in the square watching them, but for once he didn't care. This child, this scared, brave little girl, had run to him, had called him Papa, had chosen him, somehow. Out of all the people in this town, the weight of that choice settled over him like a mantle. He'd told himself he'd never care for anyone again, never risk that kind of pain. But here he was, with a child in his arms who needed him, and he found he couldn't walk away. Wouldn't walk away, not this time. Come on, Maggie said quietly, touching his arm. Bring her to the saloon. We need to figure this out. Eric nodded and followed her, Lucy still clinging to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had gone mad. Behind them, the town began to stir again, voices rising in confused conversation. But Eric barely heard them. He was too busy feeling the weight of the small body in his arms, the trust implicit in her grip, the enormous responsibility he just accepted without thinking, the locket pressed against his chest, trapped between him and Lucy, his past and his possible future literally bound together. And for the first time in 10 years, Eric Thornton felt something he thought had died with his family. The dawn came grey and uncertain, clouds gathering over the mountains like bruises. Eric had spent the night on the cot in Maggie's storage room, sleeping poorly, waking at every sound. Years of living alone had made him sensitive to changes in his environment. And the saloon was full of them, creaking boards, distant voices, the settling of old timber. He rose before first light and climbed the stairs to check on Lucy. The door to her room was slightly ajar, and he pushed it open carefully. She was curled on her side, the wooden horse clutched in one hand and her rag doll in the other. Her face in sleep looked younger than 6, innocent and untroubled. Eric watched her for a moment, feeling that strange mix of tenderness and terror that seemed to come with caring for someone. What if he failed her the way he'd failed Clara? What if his protection wasn't enough? He pushed the thoughts away and went downstairs. Maggie was already in the kitchen starting coffee. She looked up when he entered. You look terrible, she said bluntly. Didn't sleep much. Neither did I. She poured 2 cups of coffee and slid one across the table to him. Been thinking about your situation. You're going to need a place to stay. Can't keep bunking in my storage room forever. I know. I'll figure something out. What if you didn't have to? Maggie sat down across from him. Old Pritchard's cabin at the edge of town. You remember it? Eric nodded. Pritchard had been a prospector who'd struck it modestly rich and built himself a decent cabin before drinking himself to death 2 years back. The place had stood empty since, gradually falling into disrepair. "It's not much," Maggie continued. "Needs work, but it's got good bones. 4 walls, a roof that doesn't leak too bad, and it's close enough to town that Lucy could go to school if we can get the teacher to come back." "Maggie, I can't. The town owns it now. Pritchard had no family, so it reverted to us. I already talked to Mr. Chen and a few others this morning. They're willing to let you have it rent-free in exchange for fixing it up." Eric stared at her. "Why would they do that?" "Because what you did yesterday reminded folks that there's still good in this world. Because Lucy needs a home. And because, whether you realize it or not, you've become part of this community." She took a sip of her coffee. "Besides, old Samuel's itching to have a project. Man gets bored when all he does is build coffins and repair fences." Before Eric could respond, the sound of horses drew their attention. Through the kitchen window, they could see Garrick's gang mounting up in front of the saloon. The outlaw leader sat his horse with casual arrogance, surveying the town like a king, reviewing his domain. Eric and Maggie went outside. A few other townspeople had gathered, watching the gang prepare to leave. Garrick caught sight of Eric and touched his hat brim in a mocking salute. "Viking!" he called out. "Enjoy that, little girl. Treasure every moment. You'd never know when things might change." There was something in his tone that made Eric's instincts scream warning. But before he could respond, Garrick had wheeled his horse around and led his men down the main street at a trot. They disappeared around the bend, heading south, the sound of their horses fading gradually. The town seemed to exhale collectively. Sheriff Dalton emerged from his office looking relieved. "Well, that's that. Good riddance. You really think they're gone?" Mr. Chen had joined them on the boardwalk. "Gone enough," Dalton said. "At least they kept their word about leaving." Eric wasn't so sure. Something about the way Garrick had looked at him, the way he'd emphasized those last words. He filed it away for later consideration. Lucy appeared in the doorway behind them, rubbing sleep from her eyes. When she saw Eric, her face brightened. "Papa, I heard horses." The townspeople who'd gathered turned to look at her, then at Eric. He saw understanding dawn on several faces. The child had called him Papa, had claimed him publicly. There would be no backing out now, even if he wanted to. "Just some men leaving town," Eric told her gently. "Nothing to worry about." She came down the steps and slipped her hand into his. The gesture was so trusting, so natural, that Eric felt something crack in the armor around his heart. This small person had given him her faith completely. He couldn't fail her. Old Samuel, the carpenter, approached them. He was a wiry man in his 60s, with grey hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "Miss Maggie told me about the Pritchard cabin. I could use a hand getting it fixed up if you're interested." "I appreciate the offer," Eric said. "It's not charity. I genuinely need help. These old hands aren't what they used to be." Samuel crouched down to Lucy's level. "And you, little miss, what do you think about having a real house?" Lucy looked up at Eric uncertainly. "Would we live there? Together?" "If you want to," Eric said. Her face lit up with such joy that it made Eric's chest ache. "Yes, can we go see it now?" "After breakfast," Maggie interjected. "Nobody's doing anything on an empty stomach." They ate together in Maggie's kitchen, eggs and bacon and fresh bread that the saloon owner had baked that morning. Lucy was quiet at first, watching the adults with cautious eyes, but gradually she began to relax. When Maggie told her a funny story about a rooster that had once chased the sheriff down Main Street, Lucy actually laughed. It was a sound like wind chimes, bright and clean, and it made everyone at the table smile. After breakfast, Samuel led them to the Pritchard cabin. It sat at the southern edge of town, nestled against a small grove of aspen trees. The structure was solid, logs chinked with mud and moss, a stone chimney, windows that still had glass in them. But years of neglect showed everywhere. The door hung crooked on its hinges. Weeds had grown up around the foundation. Inside, dust covered everything, and there were clear signs of mice. "It needs work," Samuel said, which was an understatement. "But nothing we can't handle." Lucy walked through the cabin with wide eyes, touching everything carefully, as if it might disappear. There was a main room with a stove and a table, and a smaller room off to the side that had probably been Pritchard's bedroom. "This could be my room," Lucy said, standing in the doorway of the smaller space. "And you could sleep in the big room, Papa. We'll make it work," Eric agreed. They spent the morning assessing what needed to be done. The list was long. Repair the door, fix several loose floorboards, clean out the chimney, replace some of the chinking, scrub everything from top to bottom. But it was manageable work, and Eric found himself looking forward to it. He'd always been good with his hands, and there was something satisfying about the idea of building a home for Lucy. As they worked, making initial repairs, other townspeople began to appear. Mr. Chen brought cleaning supplies. One of the ranch hands showed up with lumber he said he could spare. Two of the women from town arrived with brooms and rags and announced they were going to make the place fit for a child to live in. Eric was overwhelmed by the generosity. He'd spent 5 years keeping these people at arm's length, and yet here they were, helping him without being asked. He tried to thank them, but they waved him off. "You stood up for that little girl," one of the women said. "That's worth something around here." By midday, the cabin was already looking better. The women had scrubbed the floors and walls until they gleamed. Samuel and Eric had fixed the door and replaced 2 of the worst floorboards. Mr. Chen had organized a supply of basic necessities, dishes, blankets, some preserved food to tide them over. Lucy was in her element, running between the adults, trying to help wherever she could. She swept the same patch of floor 3 times. She arranged and rearranged the few pieces of furniture. She chatted constantly, asking questions, making observations, filling the cabin with life and energy. Eric found himself watching her, marveling at her resilience. 2 days ago, she'd been a terrified orphan in an abusive institution. Now she was planning where to put her wooden horse on the shelf Samuel was installing. Late in the afternoon, as the work was winding down, Eric stepped outside for fresh air. He was surprised to find Lucy sitting on the porch steps, her rag doll in her lap, her expression troubled. He sat down beside her. "Everything all right? Is this real?" she asked quietly. "Or am I going to wake up back at Mrs. Hendrick's house?" The question cut him deep. "It's real, Lucy, I promise you. But how do you know?" "Things always go bad. Mama and Papa died. Mrs. Hendricks was mean. Good things don't last." Eric struggled to find the right words. "How did you promise a child security when the world had already taught her that nothing was secure? How did you offer hope when she'd learned that hope was dangerous?" Finally, he reached beneath his shirt and pulled out the locket. He'd worn it so long he rarely thought about it anymore, but now he opened it carefully and held it so Lucy could see. Inside were 2 photographs, faded with time and handling. One showed a woman with kind eyes and dark hair. The other was a little girl about Lucy's age, blonde and smiling. "Who are they?" Lucy asked softly. "My wife and daughter, Anna and Clara." Eric's voice was rough. "They died 10 years ago. I couldn't protect them, even though I tried. After they were gone, I didn't want to care about anyone again. It hurt too much." Lucy looked up at him with those 2 wise eyes. "But you care about me." "Yes, why?" It was the same question she'd asked before, and Eric still didn't have a perfect answer. "Because you needed someone. Because you called me Papa, and something in me answered. Because maybe he stopped struggling with emotions he'd kept buried for so long. Because maybe they sent you to me. Anna and Clara, maybe they knew I'd been alone long enough. Do you think they'd mind? That you're my Papa now?" Eric's throat tightened. "No, sweetheart. I think they'd be happy. I think they'd love you." Lucy studied the photographs for a long moment, then carefully closed the locket. "I won't try to replace them. I'll be me. Is that okay?" "That's perfect." Eric put his arm around her small shoulders, and she leaned against him. "You're exactly who you're supposed to be." They sat together as the sun began to sink toward the western mountains. Inside the cabin, they could hear the sounds of the townspeople finishing up their work, talking and laughing. Eric realized that for the first time in 10 years, he felt like he belonged somewhere. Not just to a place, but to a community, to a family. "Papa?" Lucy's voice was getting drowsy. "Tell me about Clara. What was she like?" And so Eric did. He told her about his daughter, how she'd loved horses and hated baths, how she'd insisted on wearing her favorite dress until it was practically rags. how she'd had a laugh that could make even the grimmest adult smile. He told stories he'd never shared with anyone, memories he'd kept locked away because they hurt too much. But telling them to Lucy, he found they hurt less. Still painful, but in a different way. Like the ache of healing instead of the agony of an open wound. When Maggie came out to tell them dinner was ready, she found them still sitting there, a big man and a small girl, watching the sunset together, learning to be family. That night, after Lucy was asleep in the cabin's small bedroom, Eric sat at the table with Samuel and Maggie. They'd stayed to help set everything up, and now they were sharing a bottle of whiskey Samuel had produced from somewhere. "You did good today," Samuel said, pouring 3 glasses. "Not just with the work. With her. I don't know what I'm doing," Eric admitted. "I'm making it up as I go." "That's what all parents do," Maggie said. "Nobody knows what they're doing. You just love them and try your best and hope it's enough. What if it's not enough? What if I fail her? Then you pick yourself up and try again." Maggie raised her glass. "To new beginnings, and to finding family in unexpected places." They drank, and for a while they talked about practical matters. What still needed to be done on the cabin, how to get Lucy enrolled in school when the teacher returned, where Eric might find work to support them. But in the back of Eric's mind, Garrick's words kept echoing. You never know when things might change. There'd been a promise in those words, a threat disguised as casual observation. Eric didn't mention his concerns to Maggie and Samuel. No point in worrying them when there was nothing concrete to worry about. But he made a mental note to stay alert, to watch for signs of trouble. He'd protected Lucy from one danger. He'd protect her from whatever came next. After his guests left, Eric checked on Lucy one more time. She was deeply asleep, her wooden horse on the small table beside her bed, her rag doll tucked under her arm. He stood in the doorway watching her breathe, steady and peaceful. He thought about what he'd told her earlier, about Anna and Clara possibly sending her to him. He wasn't a particularly religious man, had stopped believing in any kind of benevolent God the day he found his family dead. But standing here now, he wondered if maybe there was something to it. Some pattern to the universe that was bigger than just random chance and cruel fate. Eric returned to the main room and sat at the table, the lamplight casting long shadows. He pulled out the wanted poster that Lucy had found in his old cabin's wall, the one he'd retrieved, along with his other belongings that afternoon. He studied his younger face staring back at him from the faded paper. Marshal Eric Thornson, it read. Wanted for questioning in the massacre at Silver Ridge. The poster was 10 years old, issued by territorial authorities, who'd needed someone to blame when a railroad baron's hired guns had slaughtered an entire settlement. Eric had been the federal marshal assigned to protect those people. He'd failed, and when the political fallout came, powerful men had pointed fingers at him rather than accepting their own culpability. He should have destroyed this poster years ago, but he'd kept it as a reminder of who he'd been, of what he'd lost, of why he could never go back. But Lucy had found it, had brought it to him with innocent curiosity, and in doing so, had forced him to confront a truth he'd been avoiding. You couldn't build a new life while still hiding from your old one. Eric stood and walked to the stove. He should burn the poster now, consign it to ash and memory. But his hand hesitated over the flames. Not yet. There was something else in his past that needed addressing first. He returned the poster to his belongings and lay down on the narrow bed in the main room. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, it brought dreams. Not nightmares this time, but something stranger. He dreamed of Anna and Clara standing in a field of golden wheat, the sun bright behind them. They were smiling, waving to him. And beside them stood Lucy, holding their hands, bridging past and present. He woke just before dawn, with tears on his face and a strange sense of peace. Maybe Lucy had been right to ask if Anna and Clara would mind. Maybe in whatever place they existed now, they'd sent him this second chance, this opportunity to be the father he should have been, to protect the way he'd failed to protect before. The sound of small footsteps told him Lucy was awake. She appeared in his doorway, hair mussed from sleep, clutching her wooden horse. "Papa, are you all right? You were talking in your sleep," Just dreaming, little one. Come here." She padded over and climbed onto the bed beside him. Eric put his arm around her, and she snuggled against his side with the easy trust of a child who'd finally found safety. "What were you dreaming about?" she asked. "Your mama and papa. And Clara and Anna. They were all together and they looked happy." Lucy was quiet for a moment, processing this. "I think about mama and papa sometimes, but it's getting harder to remember their faces." "That's all right. It doesn't mean you love them less. Do you still remember Anna and Clara?" "Every day. But it doesn't hurt as much now. Not since you came along." He looked down at her. "You ready for breakfast? Can we have eggs? And maybe I could help cook?" "That sounds perfect." They rose and began their first real morning together as a family. Lucy proved to be enthusiastic, if not particularly skilled at cooking, breaking 2 eggs on the floor before successfully cracking one into the pan. But she laughed at her mistakes instead of fearing punishment, and Eric found himself laughing with her. After breakfast, they walked into town. Eric needed to see about finding work, and Lucy needed proper clothes. The outfit Mr. Chen had provided was serviceable, but didn't fit quite right. As they walked, Lucy chatted about everything she saw: birds, clouds, flowers growing along the path. Her joy in simple things was infectious. At the general store, Mr. Chen greeted them warmly. "Ah, the famous family. How is the cabin?" "Better, thanks to you and everyone else," Eric said. "I need to talk about paying you back for the supplies." "Nonsense. Consider it a gift. But if you're looking for work, I could use someone strong to help with shipments. Nothing regular, but whenever freight comes in. I need boxes moved and shelves restocked. I'll take it." "Good." Chen turned to Lucy. "And you, little miss, let's find you some proper clothes." While Chen measured Lucy for dresses and showed her various options, Eric noticed a man he didn't recognize enter the store. The stranger was well dressed in a suit and bowler hat, clearly not a local. He carried a leather satchel and had the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. The man approached the counter where Eric stood. "Excuse me, I'm looking for a man called the Viking. Eric Thornton. I was told I might find him here." Eric's hand instinctively moved toward where his gun would have been if he'd been wearing one. "Who's asking?" "My name is Douglas Wickham. I represent the Continental Railroad Company." The man pulled a card from his pocket and offered it to Eric. "I have a business proposition that might interest you." Every instinct Eric had developed over years of law enforcement screamed warning. The Continental Railroad. He knew that company, knew who owned it: Clayton Ashford, the railroad baron, who'd hired the guns that killed Anna and Clara, the man whose corruption Eric had tried to expose before political pressure forced him into exile. "I'm not interested in anything your company has to offer," Eric said coldly. Wickham smiled, unperturbed. "Perhaps you should hear me out before deciding. The Continental is interested in acquiring property in this area. We're prepared to make generous offers to landowners willing to sell. I don't own any land anymore." "Yes, I heard about your unfortunate transaction with Mr. Garrick. Actually, that's partly why I'm here." Wickham lowered his voice. "The Continental has been tracking Garrick's movements. He works for us on occasion, handling matters that require a certain level of persuasion." Eric felt ice form in his stomach. "You're saying the railroad sent Garrick here?" "Let's just say his presence in Redemption Creek wasn't entirely coincidental." Wickham's smile never wavered. "Mr. Ashford takes a personal interest in certain individuals. When he heard that a man matching your description had been located here, he wanted to extend a personal greeting. A greeting that involved terrorizing a child? Collateral damage." "Nothing personal." Wickham opened his satchel and pulled out a document. "But we're prepared to make amends. This is a contract offering you a generous sum to leave Redemption Creek, take the child, relocate somewhere far from here, and the Continental will ensure you're well compensated. Mr. Ashford is willing to be magnanimous." "Magnanimous." Eric's voice was flat. "That's an interesting word for a man who murders innocent people to clear land for his railroad. That's a very serious accusation, Mr. Thornton. One you couldn't prove 10 years ago, and one you certainly can't prove now." Wickham's smile finally faded. "Mr. Ashford has powerful friends. You, on the other hand, are a disgraced lawman hiding in a dying town with an orphan child. If you're smart, you'll take this offer and disappear, and if I don't, then Mr. Garrick will return. But next time he'll have more men, and next time there won't be negotiations. Mr. Ashford wants this town's land, and he's prepared to do whatever necessary to acquire it. Wickham placed the contract on the counter. Think about it. You have 3 days to decide. After that, things will become much more difficult. The man tipped his hat and walked out, leaving the contract behind. Eric stared at it, rage and fear warring in his chest. It all made sense now. Garrick's appearance hadn't been random. The threat against Lucy hadn't been just cruelty, it had been calculated intimidation. Ashford had found him. After 10 years, the man who destroyed his life had tracked him down. And now he was using the same tactics, threatening another town, another innocent people, using Eric's past to hurt his present, Papa. Lucy appeared at his elbow, holding up a blue dress. Mr. Chen says this one would look nice. What do you think? Eric forced himself to focus on her face, to push down the darkness rising in his mind. It's beautiful, little one. Perfect for you. But over her head his eyes met Mr. Chen's, and he saw the same worry reflected there. Chen had heard enough to understand. Trouble was coming, real trouble, and this time Eric wouldn't be able to buy it off with property and pride. This time he'd have to fight, and God help him, he had no idea if he had any fight left in him. That evening, after Lucy was asleep, Eric sat at his table with Maggie, Mr. Chen, and old Samuel. He'd called this meeting, and now he had to explain why. The kerosene lamp between them cast flickering shadows on their faces. I need to tell you all something, Eric began. Something about my past. He told them everything. About being Marshal Eric Thornton. About the Silver Ridge Massacre, where a railroad company had hired gunmen to clear settlers from land they wanted. About arriving too late to stop it, finding his wife and daughter among the dead. About the investigation that followed, and how Clayton Ashford, the railroad baron behind it all, had used his political connections to shift blame onto Eric rather than face justice himself. I ran, Eric said quietly. Changed my name, came here, tried to disappear. I thought if I stayed hidden, stayed quiet, the past would leave me alone. He looked at each of them. I was wrong. Ashford found me. He sent Garrick. And now he's coming for this town. Silence filled the cabin. Finally, Maggie spoke. Why would he bother? We're nothing to a man like that, because I'm here. Because he wants revenge for the trouble I caused him 10 years ago. And because his railroad wants this land. Eric pushed Wickham's contract across the table. He's offering to buy out the town. Those who refuse will face Garrick and his men. Mr. Chen picked up the contract and scanned it. These prices are insultingly low. He's not trying to buy the land. He's trying to steal it legally. That's his pattern, Eric said. Make an offer. If people refuse, send in the guns. Afterward, claim it was just settlers fighting among themselves, nothing to do with the railroad. By the time federal authorities investigate, if they even bother, everyone who could testify is dead or gone. Samuel's weathered face was grim. So what do we do? You leave, Eric said firmly. Take whatever Ashford's offering and go. This is my fight, not yours. I brought this to your doorstep. The hell you did. Maggie's eyes flashed. Ashford was going to come for this town, whether you were here or not. That's what men like him do. At least with you here, we've got someone who knows how to fight back. I'm not a marshal anymore. I'm just one man who stood up to Garrick when nobody else would, Chen pointed out. One man who gave up everything to protect a child. That counts for something. It counts for nothing against 30 armed outlaws. Then we find 30 armed townspeople. Samuel leaned forward. Eric, I was a cavalry scout for 15 years. I know how to fight. Some of the ranch hands are veterans. We're not helpless. Eric shook his head. You don't understand what you're up against. These aren't just outlaws. Garrick recruits experienced gunmen, ex-soldiers, bounty hunters, men who know their business. Civilians going up against them is suicide, so we just surrender? Maggie demanded. Let Ashford take everything we've worked for. You find somewhere else to work, somewhere else to live. You survive. Eric's voice was hard. That's what matters. Survival. Not pride, not property. Life. Some things are worth dying for, Samuel said quietly. No, they're not. Eric stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I've seen good people die for principles, for land, for honor. You know what it gets them? A hole in the ground and families left behind to grieve. It's not worth it. Nothing is worth it. They sat in uncomfortable silence. Finally, Mr. Chen spoke. What about Lucy? What will you do? Eric had been wrestling with that question all afternoon. I'll take Wickham's offer. Get enough money to take Lucy somewhere safe, somewhere far from here. Start over again. Running again, Maggie said, not unkindly. If that's what keeps her safe, yes. And what happens at the next town? When Ashford finds you again? You just keep running forever. If that's what it takes. Maggie stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkened street. I came west after my husband died because I was tired of running from life, tired of being afraid. I figured if I was going to fail, I'd rather fail trying to build something than fail running away from everything. She turned back to face him. You're a good man, Eric Thornton, but you're letting fear make your decisions. Fear of failing Lucy the way you feel you failed your first family. That's not it is. And I understand it. God knows I understand it. But here's the thing about fear. It's a poor compass. It points you away from danger, sure, but it also points you away from everything worth having. Eric wanted to argue, but the words caught in his throat. Because she was right. He was afraid. Terrified, actually. Of losing Lucy, of failing again, of watching more innocent people die because of him. I don't know what else to do, he admitted finally. You fight, Samuel said. Not with guns, not yet. You fight smart. You plan, you prepare, you find advantages. You taught me that yourself years ago, when we served together. Eric's head snapped around. What? Samuel smiled slightly. You don't remember me, do you? Fort Bridger, 1866. You were a young deputy marshal, and I was a scout attached to your detail. We spent 3 weeks tracking a gang of train robbers through the Rockies. Memory stirred. A wiry scout with sharp eyes and sharper instincts. Samuel Coltrane. You went by Sam back then. Still do to friends. I recognized you the first week you showed up here, but you were clearly hiding from something, so I kept quiet. Figured you'd tell me when you were ready. Why didn't you say anything? Because we all got our secrets, Eric. All got our reasons for ending up in places like Redemption Creek. Samuel leaned back in his chair. But I remember what you taught me about fighting smart. About using terrain, psychology, about making the enemy come to you on your terms. You were the best tactical thinker I ever served with. That was a long time ago. Skills don't rust. They're just sleeping. Samuel tapped the table. Give me 3 days. Let me scout the approaches to town, identify defensive positions, figure out what we're working with. Then we'll make a real plan. And if it's still hopeless, we'll evacuate. But at least we'll know we tried. Eric looked at each of them, these people who'd shown him nothing but kindness, who'd helped him and Lucy without asking for anything in return. They were willing to risk everything, and all they wanted was for him to try. 3 days, he said finally. But if I don't see a way to defend this town against those odds, we evacuate. Everyone. No arguments. Fair enough, Samuel agreed. They talked for another hour, making preliminary plans. Samuel would map the terrain and identify strong positions. Mr. Chen would quietly take inventory of weapons and ammunition in town. Maggie would sound out the other townspeople, see who might be willing to fight if it came to that. After they left, Eric checked on Lucy again. She was still sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm gathering around them. He sat on the edge of her bed and carefully brushed a strand of hair from her face. I won't let anything happen to you, he whispered. I promise. But even as he said it, he wondered if it was a promise he could keep. The next morning, Eric woke before dawn and did something he hadn't done in years. He opened his old trunk and pulled out his gun belt. The leather was stiff from disuse, but the pistol, a Colt .45, was still in perfect condition. He'd maintained it religiously even when he'd stopped carrying it, some part of him unable to completely let go of his old life. He strapped the belt on and drew the pistol, testing the weight and balance. It felt simultaneously foreign and familiar, like greeting an old friend you weren't sure you wanted to see. A sound at the door made him turn. Lucy stood there in her nightgown, staring at the gun in his hand with wide eyes. "Papa, are you going to hurt someone?" Eric immediately holstered the weapon. "No, sweetheart. I'm making sure I can protect you if I need to." She walked over slowly. "Is it because of the bad men? The ones who wanted me?" He should have known she'd understand more than he gave her credit for. Children always did. "Yes, they might come back. If they do, I want to be ready. I'm scared. I know." "Me too." Eric knelt down so he was at her level. "But being scared is okay. It means you're smart enough to understand danger. What matters is what we do even when we're scared." Lucy studied his face seriously. "What did you used to do before you came here?" This was the conversation Eric had been dreading. But she deserved the truth. "I was a lawman, a marshal. My job was to protect people and catch bad men, like a hero." "Some people thought so." "But I made mistakes, big ones. And people died because I wasn't good enough. Is that why you're sad sometimes? When you think I'm not looking?" Eric's throat tightened. "Yes." Lucy reached up and touched the locket that hung around his neck. "But you saved me. From the bad men in the square. That makes you a hero to me. I'm not—" "You are." Her voice was fierce for such a small child. "And I'm not going to let the bad men hurt you." Despite everything, Eric smiled. "That's my job, little one. Protecting you. We can protect each other." She said it with such conviction that Eric felt something shift inside him. Maybe she was right. Maybe protection didn't have to be a one-way street. Maybe family meant standing together, not hiding each other away. He pulled her into a hug. "Deal. We protect each other." The rest of the day passed in a strange mix of normalcy and tension. Eric helped Samuel survey the town's approaches, identifying places where defenders could be positioned if needed. Lucy stayed with Maggie, who was teaching her to bake bread, a normal domestic activity that felt surreal given the circumstances. That evening, Mr. Chen stopped by with troubling news. "I talked to the sheriff. Told him about Ashford and Garrick. He wants no part of it. Did he at least agree to help evacuate people if it comes to that?" Eric asked. "He's leaving tonight, taking the monthly stage and not coming back. Said this town isn't worth dying for." Chen's expression was disgusted. "So much for the law." Eric wasn't surprised. Dalton had never been a real lawman, just a bureaucrat with a badge. But his departure left them even more vulnerable. "How many people are willing to fight?" Eric asked. "8, not counting you and me. 3 ranch hands, 2 miners, Samuel, and 2 shop owners. All have some experience with guns, but none are soldiers. 8 men. Against Garrick's 30 or more. The math was terrible. What about evacuation? How many families would leave if we told them what's coming? Most probably. But where would they go? Some don't have money for the stage. Others have property they can't just abandon. And there's the orphanage. Mrs. Hendricks won't leave without compensation for her investment." Eric grimaced. "Of course the woman would put money over children's safety. We'll figure something out. One problem at a time." That night, Eric sat at his table with the silver locket open before him. The 2 photographs, Anna and Clara on one side, empty space on the other, seemed to hold all his past and all his fears. He thought about Maggie's words. About fear being a poor compass. About running versus fighting. About what was worth risking everything for. The truth was, Eric had been running for 10 years. Running from his failure, from his grief, from any connection that might hurt him again. He'd convinced himself it was wisdom, but maybe it was just cowardice, dressed up in practical clothes. Lucy had changed that. Her small hand in his. Her voice calling him Papa, her absolute trust that he would protect her. It had cracked something open in him, made him remember what it felt like to have something worth protecting. But was he willing to risk the townspeople's lives to protect her? Was one child worth potentially dozens of deaths? The answer, he realized, was more complicated than that. This wasn't just about Lucy anymore. It was about whether men like Ashford could keep destroying communities and innocent lives without anyone standing against them. It was about whether Eric would spend the rest of his life running, or whether he'd finally stop and say no more. He closed the locket and tucked it back beneath his shirt. The weight of it felt different now, not just a burden of grief, but a reminder. Anna and Clara had died because he'd failed to stop evil men. Maybe he couldn't change that, but he could damn well try to stop it from happening again. Tomorrow, he'd talk to Samuel about those defensive positions. Tomorrow, he'd start planning for real. Tomorrow, he'd stop running and start fighting. Tonight, he'd just sit here in the lamplight, listening to Lucy's soft breathing from the other room, and let himself feel what it meant to have a family again, even if it terrified him, even if he might lose them all, because the alternative, running forever, living in fear, never letting anyone close, that was no life at all. That was just a different kind of death, and Eric Thornton had been dead long enough. 2 weeks passed, and with each day, the town transformed. Eric had committed to defending Redemption Creek, and once that decision was made, his old instincts kicked in, like muscle memory. He was no longer a hiding hermit, but a marshal preparing for battle. Samuel's reconnaissance had been thorough. They knew every approach, every sight line, every natural choke point. The 8 men willing to fight had been training daily, not in flashy gunslinger techniques, but in the practical skills that would keep them alive. Cover, crossfire patterns, ammunition discipline, but today was different. Today was Lucy's 7th birthday, and Eric had insisted they take 1 day for normalcy, for joy, for the life they were trying to protect. He'd retrieved his old trunk from storage, the one he'd thought he'd never open again. Among the weapons and badges, he'd found something precious, a small leather-bound book, worn and stained from years of use. Enna's recipe book. His wife had kept meticulous notes, not just recipes, but memories. Little notes about when she'd first made certain dishes, what occasions they'd celebrated, what Clara had thought of each new food. Reading through it was like hearing Anna's voice again, warm and full of life. He'd found the recipe for Clara's favorite birthday cake, a simple vanilla cake with raspberry filling. Anna had written beside it, "Clara says this cake tastes like summer sunshine. Made it 3 years running for her birthday. She insists on helping and makes such a mess, but her joy is worth 10 ruined kitchens." Eric had never baked a cake in his life. But for Lucy, he'd try. Maggie had offered to help, bless her, and by mid-morning, they'd transformed her saloon kitchen into a bakery. Lucy was supposed to be staying with Mr. Chen, kept deliberately away so the cake would be a surprise. But Eric could hear her excited voice from the general store across the street, talking a mile a minute about turning 7. "You're doing fine," Maggie said, watching him carefully measure flour. "Stop looking so worried. It's a cake, not a diplomatic negotiation. Clara always said my cooking tasted like boot leather." Eric mixed the batter, following Anna's precise instructions. "If I mess this up, then we'll eat messy cake and Lucy will still have the best birthday of her life because you tried." Maggie checked the oven temperature. "You know, I never thought I'd see the day when the Viking would be fussing over a child's birthday party." "Neither did I," Eric admitted. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the kitchen filling with the smell of vanilla and butter. Eric poured the batter into 2 cake pans, trying to distribute it evenly, like Anna's notes instructed. As he slid them into the oven, Maggie spoke again. "Samuel told me about your plan. The defensive positions, the warning systems, all of it. It's a good plan," Eric said, "or as good as we can manage with what we have. It's a plan that assumes we'll fight, that people will die." Maggie's voice was quiet. "Have you thought about what happens to Lucy if you don't survive?" The question hit Eric like a physical blow. "Every hour of every day, and I've written everything down. My real name, her adoption papers, or what passes for them out here. Instructions to contact my old commander in the marshals. He'll make sure she's taken care of, placed with a good family." Eric turned away, unable to meet Maggie's eyes. "It's the best I can do." "You could still take Wickham's offer. Leave with her. We've been through this, I know. But Eric, that little girl just found a father. You're asking her to risk losing him almost immediately. Have you thought about that?" "I think about nothing else," Eric said roughly. But Maggie, if I run now, if I teach her that the answer to evil is to keep running, what kind of father am I? What kind of person am I raising her to be? A living one, a coward. There's no shame in survival. Yes, there is. When survival means letting other people die. Eric pulled out a chair and sat heavily. I ran once, after Silver Ridge, after Anna and Clara died. I ran because I couldn't face what I'd failed to stop. I've been running ever since. He looked up at Maggie. I won't run anymore. Not from Ashford, not from Garrick, not from my own past. Maggie studied him for a long moment. You know, when you first came to this town, I thought you were just another broken man, looking for a quiet place to die. Turns out I was half right. You were broken. But instead of dying, you found a reason to live again. She patted his shoulder. That's worth something. The timer rang. The cakes were done. Eric pulled them from the oven, slightly lopsided, but miraculously not burned. While they cooled, he and Maggie prepared the raspberry filling from berries she'd been saving. Tell me about Anna, Maggie said as they worked. What was she like? Eric rarely talked about his wife, but today, with Anna's recipe book open before him, the words came easier. She was kind. Not weak, kind. There's a difference. She'd stand up to anyone if she thought they were wrong, but she did it with such grace that even the person she was correcting would walk away thinking they'd learned something instead of being scolded. Sounds like someone Lucy would have loved. She would have adored Lucy, would have scooped her up and declared her part of the family immediately. Eric's hands stilled. Sometimes I wonder if that's what happened. If somehow Anna arranged all this, Lucy finding me finding the courage to care again. You believe in that sort of thing? Divine intervention? I don't know what I believe anymore. But I know that little girl calling me Papa is the best thing that's happened to me in 10 years. And I know I'd die 1,000 times over to keep her safe. They assembled the cake, Eric's large hands surprisingly gentle as he spread filling between the layers. The frosting was simpler, just butter and sugar beaten together with a bit of vanilla. It wouldn't win any prizes, but it looked like a real birthday cake. It's crooked, Eric observed. It's perfect, Maggie corrected. Now go wash up. We're having this party at 2 o'clock sharp, and you smell like a bakery. The party was held in the cabin, which they decorated with wildflowers Lucy had picked earlier in the week, not knowing they'd be for her own celebration. The guest list was small: Maggie, Mr. Chen, Samuel, and a few children from town that Lucy had started playing with in recent weeks. When Lucy walked in and saw the cake with 7 candles burning, her face lit up with such pure joy that Eric felt his chest tighten. She looked at him with wonder. Papa, you made this. For me, I had help, he admitted. But yes, happy birthday, Lucy. She threw her arms around him, and over her shoulder, Eric saw Maggie wiping her eyes. Mr. Chen was smiling. Samuel gave him a nod of approval. They sang off-key and enthusiastic. Lucy blew out her candles in one breath and made a wish she refused to share. They ate cake that was slightly dry, but tasted like love anyway. The children played while the adults watched, pretending for an afternoon that danger wasn't coming. The gifts were modest, but thoughtful. Maggie had sewn Lucy a new dress. Mr. Chen had found a book of fairy tales with beautiful illustrations. Samuel had carved a set of small animals to go with her wooden horse: a bear, a deer, a wolf. Lucy lined them up on her shelf with reverent care. They're a family, she declared. Like us. As the afternoon wore on and the other children left with their parents, Lucy curled up on Eric's lap. She was getting too big for this, growing fast, but he held her anyway, breathing in the scent of her hair and memorizing the weight of her in his arms. Papa? Her voice was drowsy. This was the best birthday ever. Better than when your first parents were alive. Eric asked gently. He never wanted her to forget them. Lucy considered this seriously. Different. Mama and Papa made me feel safe. You make me feel safe too, but also you make me feel brave. Like I can do hard things because you believe I can. You are brave. Braver than you know. She was quiet for a moment. Then are the bad men coming back? Eric had hoped to shield her from that knowledge a little longer, but Lucy had always been perceptive. Yes, probably soon. Will you fight them? Yes. Will you get hurt? The question nearly broke him. I don't know, sweetheart. I'll try not to. I heard Maggie talking to Mr. Chen. She said people might die. Lucy looked up at him with those two knowing eyes. She said you might die. Lucy, don't lie to me, Papa, please. I'm not a baby. Eric held her tighter. You're right. You're not a baby, and you deserve the truth. He took a breath. There are bad men who want to hurt this town. I'm going to try to stop them, along with some other people. And yes, it's dangerous. Yes, I could get hurt. But I promise you, I will do everything in my power to come back to you. What if you can't? What if they... Her voice caught. What if I lose you too? Then you'll have Maggie and Mr. Chen and Samuel. I've made sure you'll be taken care of. But Lucy, listen to me. He tilted her chin up so she was looking. The morning of the third day dawned cold and grey, with clouds hanging low over the mountains like a shroud. Eric woke before first light, his marshal's instinct screaming that something was wrong. The air felt different, charged with the kind of tension that came before storms or battles. He dressed quickly and checked his weapons. The Colt 45 was clean and loaded. He had extra ammunition in his belt. Lucy's ragdoll was tucked safely inside his coat. The locket hung around his neck, a talisman of everything he was fighting for. Lucy was still sleeping, curled on her side with her wooden horse clutched close. Eric stood in her doorway for a long moment, memorizing her face, storing the image away like a treasure. Then he went to Maggie's saloon, where the other defenders were gathering. They'd just begun reviewing the plan one more time when the door burst open. Mr. Chen stumbled in, out of breath, his face pale. Eric, you need to see this now. They followed him outside. Main Street was empty except for one figure standing in the center of the dusty road. Douglas Wickham, looking perfectly composed despite the early hour, briefcase in hand. Mr. Thornton, he called out pleasantly. Might we have a word? Eric walked down the steps slowly, aware of Samuel and the others flanking him. I thought we were done talking, Wickham. So did I, but recent developments have made another conversation necessary. Wickham opened his briefcase and pulled out a document. I have here a land deed. For your old property, the cabin and acreage you signed over to Mr. Garrick. What about it? It's been transferred. Mr. Garrick sold it to the Continental Railroad Company 2 days ago. Wickham smiled. For a very reasonable price, I might add. He was quite amenable to negotiation. Eric felt something cold settle in his stomach. Why would you buy land from Garrick? Because it gives us legal claim to property in this area. And because, Mr. Thornton, it establishes a pattern. You see, Mr. Garrick has been acquiring land throughout this territory on behalf of the railroad. Always legally, always with proper documentation. Wickham pulled out another document. This is a survey map showing the proposed route for the Continental's new southern extension. It runs right through Redemption Creek. There's no railroad coming here, Samuel said. This town's played out. Not for silver, no. But Mr. Ashford's geologists have identified significant copper deposits in these mountains. Copper for telegraph wires, electrical systems, the infrastructure of the future. Wickham's smile widened. This worthless little town is sitting on a fortune, and the Continental Railroad intends to extract it. The implications hit Eric like a physical blow. This wasn't about revenge. Or rather, it wasn't just about revenge. Ashford had found a way to profit from destroying Eric's life again. So Garrick was working for you the whole time, Eric said. From the beginning, of course. His appearance here, his confrontation with you, the acquisition of your land, all part of the plan. Wickham tucked the documents back into his briefcase. Mr. Ashford is a thorough man. He wanted you to suffer, yes, but he also wanted it to be profitable. And now you're here to buy out the rest of the town. Actually, no. Wickham's expression turned cold. I'm here to inform you that the Continental Railroad Company has filed legal claim to all land within a 5-mile radius of Redemption Creek, based on an old Spanish land grant we've acquired. According to territorial law, any existing claims can be challenged if the original grant predates them. That's insane, Maggie said. People have lived here for years, built homes, businesses, without proper title, as it turns out. The original settlers never filed the correct paperwork. They just squatted on land they assumed was public domain. Wickham pulled out yet another document. This grant, however, is legitimate. Dated 1821, properly recorded in Mexico City before the territory was ceded to the United States. The Continental bought it from the original family's descendants 6 months ago. Eric's mind raced. If Wickham was telling the truth, and the man's smugness suggested he was, then every property claim in Redemption Creek could be invalidated. The townspeople would have no legal leg to stand on. Even if that's true, Eric said slowly, it'll take years to sort out in court. Oh, we're not going to court. Mr. Thornson, we're going to make this very simple. Wickham gestured, and from the southern road riders began to appear. Not Garrick's gang, but surveyors, engineers, workers, and behind them wagons full of equipment. As of today, the Continental Railroad Company is taking possession of this land. Anyone who wishes to stay may do so as employees of the company. Anyone who refuses will be removed. Removed how? Samuel demanded. Wickham's smile returned. However necessary. You see, we have the law on our side now. This isn't theft or intimidation, it's legitimate business. And if some squatters refuse to vacate property, they're illegally occupying, well, the company has every right to remove them by force. The trap was perfect, Eric realized with sick certainty. Ashford had spent months setting this up. The land grant, Garrick's strategic acquisitions, the legal framework that made the railroad's claim technically legitimate, all carefully orchestrated. Even if Eric went to the federal authorities, by the time they investigated, the railroad would have established facts on the ground that would be nearly impossible to reverse. Where's Garrick? Eric asked, coming with reinforcements. You see, Mr. Ashford anticipated you might not accept this gracefully, so he's bringing 35 men, all deputized by a friendly judge as railroad security. Perfectly legal. Wickham checked his pocket watch. They should arrive in about an hour. At that point, anyone still in Redemption Creek who isn't willing to sign an employment contract will be forcibly evacuated. Resisting will be considered trespassing and assault on railroad property. The others were looking to Eric now, waiting for him to find the solution. But there wasn't one. Ashford had outmaneuvered him completely. Fighting would mean fighting the law itself. Running would mean abandoning their homes with nothing. And staying meant surrendering to employment terms that would amount to indentured servitude. You bastard, Maggie said quietly. You and Ashford and men like you just take whatever you want and you wrap it in legality so you can sleep at night. We sleep very well, thank you. Now I suggest you all begin packing your essentials. You have 1 hour. Wickham tipped his hat. Oh, and Mr. Thornson? Mr. Ashford asked me to give you a personal message. He says to tell you that he always wins, that you should have stayed disappeared, and that he'll be thinking of you when his railroad starts pulling copper from these mountains. Wickham walked away toward his surveyors, leaving the defenders of Redemption Creek standing in stunned silence. This can't be legal, Tom said desperately. There has to be something. It probably is legal, Eric said heavily. Or legal enough that challenging it would take years and money nobody here has. So what do we do? One of the miners asked. Eric looked around at the town he'd tried to save. The cabin where Lucy slept. The people who'd become his community. Everything he'd found after years of loneliness, and he had no answer. They gathered in the saloon's back room, the mood grim. Mr. Chen had retrieved the supposed land grant document from Wickham and was examining it with a merchant's eye for detail. It looks legitimate, he admitted. The seals, the signatures, the dates. If it's a forgery, it's an excellent one. Could we fight it in court? Maggie asked. With what money? What lawyers? Samuel shook his head. By the time it got heard, Ashford would own everything. Then we fight with guns, Tom said. We ambush them when they arrive. 35 men or not, if we hit them hard enough. And then what? Eric interrupted. Even if we win, which is unlikely, we'd be outlaws. Murdering deputized railroad security? The army would come, we'd all hang, so we just give up. Tom's face was red with anger. Let them take everything. I don't know. Eric's voice was louder than he intended. He took a breath, forced himself calm. I don't know what to do. Ashford's boxed us in completely. They sat in heavy silence. Outside, they could hear Wickham's surveyors beginning to mark out plots. driving stakes into the ground, measuring and recording as if the town and its people didn't exist. It was Mr. Chen who finally spoke. "There is one option. We could sell. Sell to Ashford, after everything he's done. Sell before Garrick arrives, while Wickham is still here. Force them to buy us out at fair prices instead of just taking everything." Chen looked around the table. "It's not justice, but it would give people enough money to start over somewhere else. To survive. Survive as what?" Maggie's voice was bitter. "Refugees, victims, people who let a bully chase them from their homes." "Living people," Chen countered. "Which is better than dead ones." Eric thought of Lucy, of the promise he'd made to keep her safe, of the life they'd just started building. Could he really ask her to pack up and run again? Could he teach her that the answer to evil was always surrender? But could he risk her life and everyone else's in a fight they couldn't win? "I need to think," he said finally. "We have an hour." I need to think." He walked out of the saloon and through the town, his mind churning. This was worse than a straight fight. At least in a gunfight you knew where you stood. But this web of legality and corruption, he didn't know how to fight this. He found himself at the old church, its bell tower rising above the other buildings. On impulse, he climbed the ladder to the tower where Samuel had planned to position himself as a sniper. From up here, he could see the whole valley. Redemption Creek spread out below, small and vulnerable. To the south, he could see Wickham's surveyors and the approaching dust cloud that must be Garrick's reinforced gang. To the north, the mountains rose wild and free. "I don't know what to do," Eric said out loud, unsure if he was talking to God or to Anna or to himself. "I can't beat him. He's thought of everything. And if I fight anyway, people die." Lucy could die. The wind whistled through the bell tower, carrying no answer. "Anna, if you can hear me, if there's anything after, I need help. I need to know what's right. Because I can't see it." He stood there for a long time, watching the dust cloud grow closer. 35 men, all legally authorized to take everything from him, all working for the man who'd already taken his first family. And then something caught his eye. The railroad surveyors were working in a specific pattern, marking out plots in a careful grid. But there was one area they were avoiding, a section on the eastern edge of town. Eric pulled out his own rough map and compared it to what he was seeing. They were avoiding the area around the original church foundation. The old Spanish mission that had been here before the town. Why would they avoid that? Eric's heart began to pound. He climbed down from the tower as fast as he could and ran to where Wickham stood, supervising his men. "That land grant," Eric said without preamble. "Show it to me again." Wickham raised an eyebrow. "Planning to look for loopholes?" "I assure you it's airtight. Just show me." With a shrug, Wickham pulled out the document. Eric scanned it, his Spanish rusty but functional enough to catch the relevant passages. The grant covered all lands 5 leagues in each direction from the Mission San Miguel, excepting the sacred ground of the mission itself, and 1 league in all directions from its altar. "The mission," Eric said. "Where is it?" "Long gone. Abandoned in 1840, burned down shortly after. There's nothing left. But the foundation is still there, and according to this grant, the land around it is excluded from the claim." Eric looked up, hope beginning to kindle. "How much of the town sits on that excluded land?" Wickham's face tightened. "It doesn't matter. The mission ground is a small parcel, meaningless." "How much?" A long pause. Then reluctantly, "About 1/3 of the current town. But that doesn't help you. The rest is still railroad property." But Eric was already thinking, his tactical mind engaging. 1/3 of the town, legally outside Ashford's claim, including, he checked his mental map, the church, the saloon, Mr. Chen's store, and several houses. "Not everything, but enough. We need a lawyer," Eric said, turning to Mr. Chen, who'd followed him.
"Right now."
"The best one you can find. The circuit judge comes through once a month," Chen said. "He'll be here in 2 weeks. We don't have 2 weeks. We have less than an hour." Eric's mind was racing. "Wickham, you're a lawyer, aren't you?" "I represent the Continental Railroad's interests, yes." "Then you know the law. If that mission ground is excluded from your land grant, then any existing structures and claims on that ground remain valid. Perhaps. But it's a trivial portion of the town. It's where the water rights originate. Samuel had appeared, understanding dawning on his face. The creek that feeds the whole town starts in that protected area. Without water access, your entire mining operation is worthless. Wickham's face went pale. The water rights are separate from... Are they? Eric pressed. Because I'm guessing when Ashford's lawyers researched this grant, they focused on the land itself. But water rights in this territory are a different matter entirely. Especially water that originates on protected mission ground. You're bluffing. Am I? Let's test it. Let's wait for that circuit judge to arrive and let him sort out the water rights. In the meantime, the Continental Railroad can't start mining operations without water. And I'm betting Mr. Ashford's investors won't be happy about delays. Eric crossed his arms. How long do you think it'll take to untangle this legal mess? 6 months? A year? Wickham stared at him, and Eric could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Ashford had sent him here with clear instructions. Acquire the land, start operations immediately, make Eric suffer in the process. But if Eric was right about the water rights, and the uncertainty in Wickham's expression suggested he might be, then the whole operation could stall indefinitely. What do you want? Wickham asked finally. Fair market prices for anyone who wants to sell. Legal protections for anyone who wants to stay on the mission ground. And a guarantee that the Continental Railroad will negotiate in good faith for water access instead of using force. That's not what Mr. Ashford wanted. I don't care what Ashford wanted. I care about these people keeping their homes and their dignity. Eric leaned in closer. Here's what I think happened, Wickham. I think Ashford got so focused on revenge that he didn't do his full legal homework. I think he assumed this would be easy, and now he's got 35 men riding here to enforce a claim that might not hold up. Mr. Garrick won't be pleased if I send him back empty-handed. Tell Garrick the situation has changed. Tell him the Continental needs to renegotiate. Tell him whatever you want. But those men don't ride into this town making threats. Not today. Wickham considered this for a long moment. Finally he nodded. I'll need to send a telegram to Mr. Ashford. This is beyond my authority to negotiate. You do that. But in the meantime, your surveyors stay outside the mission ground, and Garrick's men stay outside town. Agreed. Agreed. Temporarily, Wickham's expression was cold. But Mr. Thornton, understand this. You may have found a loophole, but Mr. Ashford doesn't forget. He'll find another way. He always does. Let him try. I'm not running anymore. Wickham left to send his telegram, and Eric turned to find a crowd had gathered, townspeople who'd been watching the confrontation. Samuel was grinning. Mr. Chen looked impressed. Maggie was shaking her head in disbelief. Did you just outmaneuver Clayton Ashford with Spanish colonial law? She asked. Maybe, if I'm right about the water rights. Eric felt exhaustion wash over him. We bought time, nothing more. But time is something. It's everything, Samuel said. Time to get a real lawyer here. Time to research the full legal picture. Time to make sure everyone's claims are properly documented. He clapped Eric on the shoulder. That was brilliant, my friend. That was desperate, Eric corrected. And it might not hold, but it's better than fighting a battle we couldn't win. The crowd began to disperse, people talking excitedly about what had just happened. Eric started back toward his cabin, needing to check on Lucy, when a rider appeared from the south road. One of Garrick's men, riding hard. Eric's hand went to his gun, but the rider pulled up short and held up his hands in a gesture of peace. Message from Mr. Garrick, the man called out. He says to tell you he'll be waiting outside town for Mr. Wickham's word. But he also says to tell you this isn't over. Says Mr. Ashford has given him personal instructions regarding you and the girl. Ice formed in Eric's veins. What kind of instructions? The rider smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. The kind that don't need lawyers or land grants. The kind that happen in the dark when nobody's watching. He wheeled his horse around. Sleep light, Viking. We'll be seeing you. The rider galloped away, leaving Eric standing in the dusty street with a cold certainty settling over him. He'd won a legal battle, yes, But Ashford's revenge wasn't just about land and profit. It was personal. And men like Garrick didn't need legal authority to hurt people. Eric went to his cabin and found Lucy awake, sitting at the table with her wooden animals arranged in a careful line. She looked up when he entered. "Papa?" "I heard shouting. Is everything all right?" He sat down across from her, suddenly exhausted. "We had some trouble, but we worked it out. For now, the bad men didn't come?" "Not yet. But Lucy," he reached across and took her small hand. "I need you to listen carefully. Things might get dangerous again. I need you to promise me that if anything happens, you'll go straight to the mine shaft like we practiced. Don't wait for me. Don't try to help. Just run and hide. Can you promise me that?" Her eyes were too knowing for a 7-year-old. "You think they're still coming, don't you? Even though you won, I think we need to be careful. I'm not scared," but her grip on his hand tightened. "As long as you're here, I'm not scared." Eric wished he could promise her he'd always be here. But life had taught him that some promises couldn't be kept, no matter how much you wanted to keep them. Instead, he said, "I'm going to do everything I can to keep you safe. Everything. Do you believe me?" "Yes, Papa." They sat together in the quiet cabin, holding hands across the table, while outside the sun climbed higher and somewhere to the south. 35 armed men waited for orders that might send them into town anyway. Eric had bought time with clever legal maneuvering, but he knew in his bones that the real fight was still coming. Ashford wouldn't let him win, and Garrick wouldn't let him sleep peacefully, knowing that victory had been snatched away. The war wasn't over. It had just changed shape, and this time, Eric would need more than legal loopholes in Spanish, land grants to survive it. He'd need to become the marshal. He used to be the man who'd never lost a fight, because he'd never fought fair when lives were at stake. The man he'd been trying to leave behind, the man he'd need to become again if he wanted to protect his daughter and his town. The Viking was done hiding. Eric Thornson, U.S. Marshal, was about to remind Clayton Ashford and Silas Garrick exactly why they should have left him alone. For 3 days, an uneasy peace settled over Redemption Creek. Wickham's surveyors remained camped outside the mission ground boundaries, and Garrick's men stayed visible on the southern ridge, watching and waiting. The tension was thick enough to taste. Everyone knew the stalemate couldn't last forever. Eric used the time to prepare, but this time he wasn't just planning defense. He was planning war. On the first day, he rode out alone to where Garrick's men were camped. They watched him approach with rifles ready, but he kept his hands visible and rode slowly. Garrick himself emerged from a tent, that cold smile on his face. "Come to surrender, Viking. Come to talk." Eric dismounted but stayed near his horse. "Your employer's legal claim hit a snag. I'm guessing you know that. I know Wickham's crying about water rights and mission grounds. But Mr. Ashford doesn't pay me to worry about legalities. He pays me to get results. And what results does he want now?" Garrick's smile widened. "You dead." The town cleared. And that little girl, well, Mr. Ashford had some specific thoughts about her. "Wanted me to make sure you suffered the way he suffered when you ruined his reputation." Eric felt rage rise in his throat, but kept his voice level. "Touch her, and I'll kill every man in your camp. Starting with you." Big words from one man against 35. "I'm not one man. I'm a former U.S. Marshal with connections you can't imagine. We've already sent detailed reports about Ashford's operation to the territorial governor, the Federal Marshal Service, and 3 newspapers. If anything happens to me or that child, if this town is attacked, those reports get published. Ashford's reputation won't just be ruined, he'll face criminal charges." It was a bluff, but Eric delivered it with absolute conviction. Garrick's smile faltered slightly. "You're lying." "Am I? You willing to bet your employer's freedom on it? Because I guarantee you, if Ashford goes down, he'll throw you and all your men to the wolves to save himself. That's what men like him do." Garrick was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want, Thornson?" "Take your men and leave. Tell Ashford the job's too risky. Tell him whatever you want. But ride away from Redemption Creek and don't come back." "Can't do that. I've got a reputation too. Word gets out that I backed down from an old lawman and a dying town. I'm finished in this business." then you got a problem. Because I'm not backing down either. And when push comes to shove, one of us is going to die on this ground. Eric climbed back on his horse. Think about whether Ashford's money is worth that. He rode away, without waiting for an answer, feeling the weight of hostile stares on his back. He hadn't expected to change Garrick's mind. Men like that didn't back down. But he'd planted seeds of doubt. Made them think. Made them worry about what might be waiting for them if they attacked. It was psychological warfare, the kind Eric had been trained in as a marshal. Make the enemy uncertain. Make them see ghosts in every shadow. Make them wonder if the fight would cost more than it was worth. On the second day, the circuit judge arrived unexpectedly early, a stroke of luck that Eric didn't question. Judge Harrison was an older man with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness. Mr. Chen had sent him an urgent message about the land dispute, and Harrison had ridden hard to get there. Eric spent hours with the judge, showing him the Spanish land grant, explaining the water rights situation, laying out the full scope of Ashford's scheme. Harrison listened carefully, asked pointed questions, and took copious notes. "This is a complicated matter," Harrison said finally. "The land grant appears legitimate, but you're right about the mission ground exclusion. And water rights, that's territorial law, beyond Ashford's grant entirely. Can you rule on it?" "Not immediately. I need to research precedents, consult with territorial authorities. But I can issue a temporary injunction preventing any mining operations or forced removals until the matter is settled properly." "How long will that take?" "Months, maybe a year." Harrison studied Eric's face. "That's not what you wanted to hear. It's better than nothing. But, Judge, there's something else you need to know." Eric told him about Garrick's camp, about the threats, about Ashford's personal vendetta. "Whatever injunction you issue, they might ignore it. They've got 35 armed men out there who don't care about legal niceties. Then I'll request federal marshals to enforce my ruling. That it could take weeks. No." Harrison's expression was grave. "I'll do what I can legally, Mr. Thornton, but I suspect you're going to have to hold out until help arrives." "Can you do that?" Eric thought about his 8 defenders, about Lucy, about everything at stake. "Don't have a choice." Harrison issued his injunction that afternoon, posting it prominently in town and sending a copy to Wickham. The railroad lawyer read it with barely concealed fury. "This is a delaying tactic. This is the law," Harrison corrected. "And you will abide by it or face contempt charges. They've already sent telegrams requesting federal enforcement. Mr. Ashford won't be pleased. Mr. Ashford can take his displeasure to a higher court. Until then, no mining operations, no forced removals, no intimidation of the townspeople. Are we clear?" Wickham nodded stiffly and left. Eric watched him ride out to Garrick's camp, knowing that the injunction had just changed the calculus. If Garrick attacked now, it wouldn't just be violence. It would be in defiance of a judicial order. That meant federal involvement, military intervention potentially, but it also meant Garrick had nothing to lose. If he was going to break the law anyway, he might as well break it thoroughly. On the third day, Eric gathered his defenders one more time. But now the meeting included Judge Harrison, Maggie, Mr. Chen, and several other townspeople who'd proven trustworthy. "We need to be realistic," Eric told them. "The injunction buys us time, but it also backs Garrick into a corner. Men like him don't retreat when trapped, they attack." "When?" Tom asked. "Soon, probably tonight or tomorrow. They'll want to hit us fast, do as much damage as possible, then disappear before federal authorities can respond. So we're still preparing for battle," Samuel said. "It wasn't a question, yes, but now we're not just defending property. We're defending a legal judgment. That means if we can hold out and survive, the law is actually on our side. Any attack on this town becomes an attack on federal authority." Harrison nodded. "I'll be here as witness. If violence occurs, my testimony will carry significant weight." They spent the day fortifying positions. Eric had abandoned his earlier plan of scattered defenders that had been for a legal fight against superior numbers. Now, knowing an illegal night attack was likely, he concentrated his forces. The church would be their stronghold. It was built of stone, defensible, and sat on the highest ground in the mission area. Eric positioned his best marksmen in the bell tower, Samuel and two of the ranch hands. The main floor would house the non-combatants, protected by thick walls and narrow windows, perfect for firing positions. "We let them come into town," Eric explained. "Don't engage at range. Let them think they're succeeding. Then we hit them from the church with concentrated fire. They'll expect scattered resistance, but we'll give them a fortress." "What about the rest of the buildings?" Maggie asked. "We sacrifice them if we have to. Property can be rebuilt. People can't." Eric looked around at the faces watching him, people who trusted him to lead them. "Our goal isn't to kill Garrick's men. It's to survive long enough for federal help to arrive. Judge Harrison has requested cavalry support from Fort Bridger. They could be here in 3 days if they ride hard." "3 days," Mr. Chen repeated. "Can we hold for 3 days?" "We can hold for as long as we have to." But privately, Eric had his doubts. 3 days against 35 professional guns was a long time, longer than most sieges lasted. They'd need ammunition, food, water. They'd need luck. They'd need a miracle. That afternoon, Eric took Lucy to the church to show her the shelter that had been prepared. The church basement had been stocked with supplies, blankets, water. It would be cramped with all the women and children, but it was as safe as they could make it. "You'll stay here," Eric told her, "with Maggie and the others. No matter what you hear, no matter how scared you get, you stay down here. Understand?" Lucy nodded, but her eyes were frightened. "Where will you be?" "Up in the bell tower, watching over everything." "Watching over you?" "Papa," her voice broke, "I don't want you to go." Eric knelt down and pulled her into his arms. "I know, sweetheart. I don't want to go either. But some things are worth fighting for. And you're worth everything. What if you don't come back? Then Judge Harrison will make sure you're taken care of. Maggie and Mr. Chen, too. You'll never be alone, Lucy. I've made absolutely certain of that. I'd rather be alone with you than safe with anyone else." The words broke his heart. "I'm coming back. I promise you I'm coming back." But even as he said it, Eric wondered if it was a lie. Wondered if he was making a promise he couldn't keep again that evening. He stood in the church bell tower and watched the sun set over Redemption Creek. From up here, he could see Garrick's camp, small fires against the darkening hillside. Could see the shadowy figures moving about, preparing for whatever came next. The town bell hung silent beside him, old and tarnished, but still functional. It hadn't rung in years, not since the church's congregation had dwindled to nothing. But they'd tested it this morning, and its deep voice had carried across the valley strong and clear. Tomorrow or tonight or whenever Garrick came, that bell would ring again. It would ring as a warning, as a call to arms, as a statement that Redemption Creek would not go quietly into the dark. Samuel climbed up to join him. "You think they'll come tonight?" "Maybe, probably tomorrow at dawn. That's when defenders are most tired, most likely to be caught off guard. And we'll be ready as we can be." Eric was quiet for a moment. "Sam, if something happens to me, it won't. If it does, Lucy needs someone to watch over her. To make sure she's placed with a good family. To make sure she remembers that she was loved. You can tell her that yourself when this is over. Sam, no." Samuel's voice was firm. "I'm not listening to your last wishes because you're not dying. We're going to win this fight, and you're going to raise that little girl, and years from now, you're both going to laugh about how worried you were." He gripped Eric's shoulder. "Have faith, my friend. We've been in worse spots, have we?" "Well, no. But there's always a first time." Samuel's attempt at humor fell flat, but Eric appreciated the effort. They stood together in the tower, two old warriors watching the darkness gather. Somewhere in that darkness, 35 men with guns waited. Somewhere, Silas Garrick was making his plans, deciding when and how to strike. And here, in this bell tower, 2 men prepared to defend everything they held dear against impossible odds. The night deepened. Stars emerged, cold and distant. Eric touched the locket beneath his shirt, feeling the weight of both photographs, past and present, loss and hope. Lucy's rag doll pressed against his heart from his coat pocket. "Anna," he whispered to the darkness, "if you're watching, if there's any way you can help, we need it. We need all the help we can get." The wind carried no answer. But in the valley below, one of Garrick's fires flickered out. Then another. The camp was going dark. "They're moving," Samuel said quietly. Eric's hand found his rifle. "Ring the bell. Get everyone to positions. It's starting." Samuel began tolling the bell, and its deep voice rolled across Redemption Creek like thunder. A warning, a call to arms, a declaration of defiance. In the church basement, Lucy heard the bell and clutched her wooden horse tighter. In scattered houses across town, defenders grabbed weapons and ran for the church. In the darkness beyond town, 35 men with guns began their advance, and in the bell tower, Eric Thornson, former marshal, current father, reluctant warrior, settled his rifle against his shoulder and prepared to make his stand. The bell kept ringing, steady and relentless. The darkness kept gathering, thick and hungry, and somewhere between the bell's voice and the darkness's silence, the fate of Redemption Creek hung in the balance. The waiting was over. The battle had begun. The chase led into the foothills south of town, where the land turned rough and the pine forest grew thick. Garrick knew these trails, had probably scouted them weeks ago, but Eric had something Garrick didn't. Rage. Pure, focused rage at a man who'd threatened his daughter. They rode hard for 10 minutes, horses laboring up steep slopes, crashing through underbrush. Garrick was trying to lose him, but Eric stayed close, his borrowed horse responding to his skilled handling. Years ago, as a marshal, he'd chased dozens of men through terrain like this. The skills came back like they'd never left. Garrick finally pulled up in a small clearing, his horse blown and heaving. He dismounted and turned to face Eric with both hands near his guns. Eric reined in 30 feet away and swung down from his saddle. "Just you and me now, Marshal," Garrick said. "No deputies, no townspeople. Just 2 men settling accounts. You threatened my daughter," Eric said, his voice cold and level. "You came to my town to kill her, to hurt her. That's not business. That's personal. Everything's personal with you, isn't it? That's your weakness." Garrick's hands moved slightly. "You care too much. Makes you predictable. Makes you vulnerable. And you don't care at all. That's your weakness. We'll see." Garrick's hand dropped toward his gun. Eric's hand was already moving. The old reflexes, honed by years of practice and survival, took over. His Colt cleared leather a heartbeat before Garrick's, and he fired twice in rapid succession. The first shot hit Garrick in the right shoulder, spinning him. The second took him in the chest, just left of center. Garrick's own shot went wild, his gun flying from his hand as he stumbled backward and fell. Eric approached carefully, his gun still trained on the fallen man. Garrick was on his back, blood spreading across his shirt, his breathing labored. But his eyes were still alert, still calculating. "Well shot," Garrick said, his voice weak. "Faster than I expected. You were Ashford's weapon." "But weapons can be pointed at their makers." Eric crouched down beside him. "Tell me where to find Ashford. Tell me how to stop him from coming after my daughter again." Garrick laughed, which turned into a cough that brought up blood. "You think killing me stops anything? Ashford's got a dozen men like me. He'll just hire another, and another. He's rich, powerful, connected. You're just one broken marshal hiding in a dying town. Then I'll deal with each man he sends. Forever, if I have to. Forever's a long time, Thornton. You really want to spend your life looking over your shoulder? Teaching that little girl to fear every stranger?" Garrick's eyes were dimming now. "You should have taken the money. Should have run when you had the chance. Running's not living." "I won't teach Lucy to be afraid." "Then you're a fool." Garrick's breathing was getting shallower. "But maybe that's not the worst thing. Being a fool who loves somebody. Better than being smart and empty." His eyes closed. His breathing stopped. Silas Garrick, the wolf of the territory, was dead. Eric stood slowly, holstering his gun. He felt no satisfaction in the kill, no triumph. Just a hollow weariness. One threat was ended, but Garrick had been right. Ashford would send others. This wasn't over. Maybe it would never be over. The sound of approaching horses made him turn. Federal marshals, 3 of them, rode into the clearing with guns drawn. The lead marshal was a man Eric recognized. Marshal Thomas Webb, his old commander. "Eric Thornton," Webb said, dismounting. "Heard you'd been hiding up here. Thought you were dead. I was. For a while. Eric gestured at Garrick's body. This is Silas Garrick. He led the attack on Redemption Creek. He's working for Clayton Ashford, the railroad baron. Webb walked over and studied the body. Ashford. We've been building a case against him for 2 years. Corruption, extortion, multiple murders. But he's slippery, hides behind lawyers and money. You got evidence connecting him to this attack? Judge Harrison witnessed the whole thing, and I've got documents showing the railroad's involvement. Eric met Webb's eyes. But that's not enough, is it? Men like Ashford don't go down for hiring gunmen. They get their wrists slapped, while the men they hire hang. Usually, yes. Webb paused. But this time might be different. Attacking a town under federal judicial protection, that's not just crime, that's insurrection. And we've got testimony from one of Garrick's men who surrendered. He's willing to detail how Ashford personally ordered the attack, gave specific instructions about targets. Hope stirred in Eric's chest. Including Lucy? Including his orders to take her? Especially that. Ordering harm to a child tends to make even corrupt judges pay attention. Webb clasped Eric's shoulder. We might actually get him this time. Put him away where he belongs. Might isn't enough. I need guarantees. Law doesn't work in guarantees, Eric, you know that. But I promise you, we'll throw everything we have at Ashford. And with your testimony, Judge Harrison's report, the physical evidence, we've got the best shot we've ever had. Eric wanted to believe him, wanted to think that justice might actually prevail for once. But he'd been disappointed too many times before. What about the town? He asked. The people who fought today, heroes all of them. We'll make sure that's in every report. And that land dispute. Harrison's already filing to have Ashford's grant invalidated based on fraud. The Continental Railroad's going to have a hell of a time explaining how they hired a gang of outlaws to enforce a legitimate business claim. So we won. You survived. That's its own kind of victory. Webb looked at the sky, where smoke from Redemption Creek was still visible. Now let's get back to town. You've got people waiting for you. The ride back seemed longer than the chase out. Eric's adrenaline was fading, leaving exhaustion and pain in its wake. He'd been shot during the battle, just a graze on his left arm, but it throbbed with every heartbeat. His shoulder ached from the rifle's recoil. His hands were blistered from climbing and fighting, but he was alive. And Lucy was safe. When they rode into Redemption Creek, the scene was organized chaos. Federal marshals were rounding up the surviving members of Garrick's gang. Townspeople were tending to wounded, putting out small fires, beginning the work of salvage and repair. The dead, both defenders and attackers, had been laid out respectfully, covered with blankets. Samuel saw Eric first and came running. You crazy fool! Charging off after Garrick alone. You could have been killed. He's dead, Eric said simply. He won't threaten anyone again, and nearly got yourself killed doing it. But Samuel was grinning despite his anger. Come on! There's someone who's been worried sick about you. They walked to the church, where the non-combatants were emerging from the basement. Eric saw Maggie first, then Mr. Chen, and then Lucy pushing through the crowd, her face streaked with tears. Papa! He caught her as she launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck with desperate strength. She was crying and talking at the same time, words tumbling over each other too fast to follow. I'm here, Eric said, holding her tight. I'm here, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere. I heard shooting and the bell stopped ringing and then you were gone and nobody would tell me where. She pulled back to look at his face, her eyes red from crying. You promised you'd come back. And I did. I always will. He kissed her forehead. I'm sorry I scared you. Lucy noticed the blood on his sleeve and her eyes widened. You're hurt! It's just a scratch. I'm fine. You're not fine. You need a doctor. She turned to Maggie. Miss Maggie, Papa needs a doctor. Despite everything, Eric found himself smiling. Lucy's fierce protectiveness, her insistence that he be taken care of. It was so like Clara had been, so full of love and determination. I'll get the doctor, Maggie said. But Eric, we lost 2 men, good men. And 4 more are badly wounded. The smile faded. Who? She told him, and each name hit like a blow. Men who'd trusted him to lead them. Men who died defending their homes. They were heroes, Webb said, having followed Eric to the church. They'll be recognized as such. Federal citations for all of them. Citations don't bring them back, Eric said quietly. No, but they mean something to the families left behind. Pensions, recognition, the knowledge that their sacrifice mattered. Webb's expression was somber. This is the cost of standing against evil, Eric. You know that. It's never free. Eric looked around at the town, damaged, bloodied, but standing. At the people, tired, grieving, but alive. At Lucy, who'd finally let go of him but was staying close, watching him with worried eyes. Was it worth it? He asked Webb quietly. That's not for me to answer. That's for them. Webb gestured at the townspeople. But from where I'm standing, you gave them something worth having. The ability to say they didn't surrender. That they stood for what was right, even when it was hard. Even when it cost them. Eric felt Lucy's small hand slip into his. Papa, can we go home now? Home. The little cabin they'd fixed up together. The place where they'd become a family. Yes, sweetheart. We can go home. But first, he had to see to his wounded defenders. Had to pay respects to the families of the fallen. Had to begin the long process of healing and rebuilding. The battle was over. Garrick was dead. Federal marshals would pursue Ashford through the courts. 6 weeks later, autumn had begun to paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Redemption Creek had settled into a new normal, quieter than before, marked by the events of that violent morning, but alive and rebuilding. The federal marshals had stayed for 2 weeks, taking testimony and building their case against Clayton Ashford. True to Marshal Webb's word, they'd arrested the railroad baron on charges of conspiracy, extortion, and inciting violence against a federally protected settlement. The trial was set for spring, and while Ashford's lawyers were already filing motions and delays, Webb assured Eric that the evidence was strong enough to convict. The town had held funerals for the 2 men who'd fallen defending it. Eric had spoken at both services, though words felt inadequate in the face of such loss. The widows and children of the fallen had been promised federal pensions, and the town had taken up collections to help see them through the winter. It wasn't enough, could never be enough, but it was something. The wounded had mostly recovered, though one of the miners would walk with a limp for the rest of his life. And Tom had lost 2 fingers from his left hand. They wore their injuries with a kind of quiet pride, badges of honor earned in defense of home. The town itself bore scars too. 3 buildings had been burned badly enough to require complete reconstruction. Bullet holes marked walls throughout the settlement, and some folks had taken to leaving them as reminders. "So we don't forget," one old woman had said. "So we remember what we're capable of when we have to be." Judge Harrison had ruled decisively on the land dispute. The Spanish land grant was declared invalid due to fraud in its procurement, and all Continental Railroad claims to Redemption Creek were voided. The townspeople's property rights were affirmed and properly documented this time, with titles filed correctly through the territorial office. The railroad had withdrawn entirely, selling off its fraudulent acquisitions at a loss. Wickham had disappeared before he could be arrested as an accomplice, but warrants were out for him throughout the territory. Through it all, Eric and Lucy had settled into the rhythms of everyday life. The cabin was truly theirs now, no longer a temporary shelter, but a real home. Eric had built shelves for Lucy's growing collection of carved animals. Samuel had taken to whittling new ones for her, and Mr. Chen had sent away for store-bought toys that now shared space with the handmade treasures. Lucy had started school. The teacher had returned to town after the danger passed, and now Lucy walked to the little schoolhouse every morning with other children, swinging a small lunch pail and chattering about arithmetic and reading. She was bright, curious, hungry to learn everything she could. Eric had taken a position as deputy marshal for the territory, working under Webb's command. It was part-time work, allowing him to stay close to Lucy while still using his skills to help maintain order. He'd resisted at first, too many memories, too much weight, but Lucy had been the one to convince him. "You're good at helping people, Papa," she'd said, And you like it even when you pretend you don't. Why wouldn't you do what you're good at? Simple wisdom from a 7-year-old. How could he argue? This particular morning, Eric was in his garden preparing the soil for winter. Lucy was supposed to be helping, but she'd gotten distracted by a butterfly and was chasing it through the yard, her laughter bright as wind chimes. "Papa, look! It's orange and black. Do you think it's flying south for winter?" "Probably." "Smart butterfly. Can we go south for winter too?" "We live here now, sweetheart." "This is home, I know. But it might be nice to see somewhere warm, just to visit." She abandoned the butterfly chase and came to sit beside him. "Papa, can I ask you something?" "Always. Am I really your daughter?" "Forever." The question startled him. "Of course you are. Why would you ask?" "Because Jenny at school said I can't really be your daughter because you didn't give birth to me. She said adopted children aren't real children." Eric set down his trowel and pulled Lucy into his lap. "Listen to me very carefully. You are my daughter in every way that matters, not because of blood, but because of choice. You chose me that day in the town square, and I chose you right back. That makes us family in the most important way possible. But do you love me?" "Yes, Papa, so much. And I love you. So much my heart could burst with it sometimes. That's what makes us family. Not genetics or birth certificates or anything else. Love, choice, commitment." He tilted her chin up so she was looking at him. "Jenny doesn't understand that yet. Maybe someday she will. But you don't need her approval or anyone else's. You're a Thornton now, and that's the end of it." Lucy thought about this, then nodded seriously. "I'm glad I picked you. I'm glad you picked me too." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, Eric's arms around his daughter, both of them watching clouds drift across the autumn sky. This, Eric thought, was what happiness felt like. Not the absence of pain or fear, but the presence of love strong enough to make both bearable. Later that afternoon, they walked into town for supplies. Redemption Creek looked different now, more purposeful, more alive. New families had moved in, attracted by the land grants being offered to settlers willing to rebuild. The town was growing again, finding new life after its brush with death. At the general store, Mr. Chen greeted them warmly. "Ah, the Thornsons. I just received your order, the books you wanted for Lucy." "Books!" Lucy's eyes lit up. "Can I see them?" While Lucy examined her new books with reverent care, Chen pulled Eric aside. "I wanted to tell you we received word this morning. Ashford's trial has been moved up. They want you to testify in 2 weeks." Eric's stomach clenched. He'd known this was coming, but that didn't make it easier. Facing Ashford meant facing the man responsible for Anna and Clara's deaths, for 10 years of grief and isolation. "Will you go?" Chen asked quietly. "I have to. For the people who died here. For everyone Ashford's hurt over the years." Eric paused. "But I'm worried about Lucy. Leaving her even for a few days, she can stay with Maggie and me. We'll watch her like she's our own. You know that?" "I do. Thank you." That evening, Eric sat Lucy down and explained about the trial. She listened carefully, her face serious. "Will you have to talk about bad things?" "Yes. Things that happened a long time ago, and things that happened here. It won't be easy. Will that bad man be there?" "Mr. Ashford?" "Yes." Lucy was quiet for a moment. "Then I want to go with you." "Sweetheart, no. It's too dangerous, and not to the trial, just to the town. So I'm close if you need me." Her voice was firm. "You were there for me when I was scared." "I want to be there for you." Eric felt his throat tighten. "That's very brave. But Lucy, this is adult business. It's not. You said we protect each other. You said family stands together." She looked up at him with those knowing eyes. "Were you lying?" "No, I want to keep you safe. I'm safest with you, and you're strongest with me. That's how family works, right?" He pulled her close, marveling at the wisdom in this small person. "Right, that's exactly how it works." 2 weeks later, they made the journey together. Eric, Lucy, Samuel, and Maggie. The territorial capital was 3 days' travel by stage, a bustling city that made Lucy's eyes widen with wonder. She'd never seen so many people, so many buildings, so much activity. They stayed in a modest hotel, and Eric spent the evening before his testimony preparing with the federal prosecutors. Lucy sat in the corner of the room, quietly playing with her wooden animals, her presence a constant comfort. The trial itself was held in a grand courthouse with high ceilings and solemn furnishings. Eric took the stand and told his story, all of it. The Silver Ridge massacre, his family's deaths, Ashford's role in it all. Then he testified about Redemption Creek, about the threats and the violence, about the attack that had cost 2 men their lives. Clayton Ashford sat at the defense table, impeccably dressed, his face showing no emotion. He looked older than Eric remembered, grayer, but still radiating the confidence of a man who'd always been able to buy his way out of trouble. When Eric finished, Ashford's lawyer cross-examined him, trying to poke holes in his testimony, suggesting Eric was motivated by personal vendetta rather than truth. But Eric's testimony was solid, backed by documents and other witnesses. The trial lasted 3 days. On the final day, the jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning with their verdict. Guilty on all counts. Ashford's face crumpled as the sentence was read. 20 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for 15. His empire would be dismantled, his assets seized to pay restitution to his victims. Eric watched from the gallery, Lucy beside him holding his hand. He expected to feel triumph or satisfaction or the sweet taste of revenge. Instead, he just felt tired and sad. All that destruction, all those lives ruined, for what? Money, pride, the hollow satisfaction of power? "Papa," Lucy whispered. "Are you okay?" "I am now. It's over. Forever." Forever. They left the courthouse and walked through the city streets, just the 2 of them. The autumn afternoon was beautiful, the air crisp and clean. "Papa," Lucy said after a while, "what happens now?" "Now we go home. Back to Redemption Creek, back to our life. And nobody will try to hurt us anymore." "I can't promise that, sweetheart. The world has dangers, and bad people exist. But the big threat, the man who wanted to hurt us specifically, he's gone. He can't reach us anymore." "Good." Lucy skipped ahead, then turned back to face him, walking backward. Papa, I've been thinking." "About what?" "About that locket you wear." "The one with the pictures?" Eric touched it reflexively. "What about it?" "You have Anna and Clara on one side and me on the other. But there's no picture of you. That doesn't seem right. The locket's not for me. It's to remind me of who I'm carrying in my heart. But you're in my heart too. And if I had a locket, I'd put you in it. Because that's what families do. They carry each other." She smiled. "Maybe we should get you a new locket. One big enough for all of us." Eric stopped walking, overcome by the simple perfection of her logic. The old locket held his past, precious, important, never to be forgotten. But maybe it was time to expand it, to make room for the present and future too. "You know what?" he said, crouching down to her level. "That's a wonderful idea. Let's find a jeweler before we leave tomorrow." "Really?" Her face lit up. "Can it have both families? Your old one and our new one?" "Yes, because they're all part of the same story, aren't they? All part of what made us who we are." Lucy threw her arms around him. "I love our family, Papa, all of it. Even the parts I never got to meet. I love our family too." They found a jeweler that afternoon, a skilled craftsman who listened to their request and promised to create something special. It would be ready in 2 weeks, and he'd send it to Redemption Creek. The journey home was peaceful. Lucy slept on Eric's shoulder in the stage, her wooden horse clutched in one hand. Samuel and Maggie played cards and talked quietly. The landscape rolled by, familiar and welcoming. When they finally arrived back in Redemption Creek, it felt like coming home in a way Eric's old cabin had never felt. This was more than just a place. It was a community, a commitment, a choice to belong. That first night back, Eric tucked Lucy into bed and sat beside her, as had become their ritual. "Tell me a story," she requested. "About Clara?" So he did, sharing memories of his first daughter, her favorite games, her stubborn streak, her infectious laugh. But this time, the memories didn't hurt quite so much. Instead, they felt like gifts, precious parts of his past that enriched his present. "I wish I could have known her," Lucy said sleepily. "We would have been friends. You would have. She would have loved you. Do you think she's happy? That you found me?" Eric thought about it carefully. I think she's happy that I learned to love again, that I didn't stay sad forever, that I chose to keep living instead of just surviving. That's what you taught me too, to keep living even when things are scary." Lucy yawned. "Papa, am I going to remember this? When I grow up." "Remember what, sweetheart?" "This us, how safe I feel, how much you love me. I don't want to forget, like I'm forgetting my first mama and papa." Eric's heart ached. "You'll remember the important parts. And the things you forget, I'll remind you. That's what family does. We help each other remember. Promise." "Promise." Lucy's eyes drifted closed. "Papa, thank you for saving me. Thank you for saving me right back." He sat there long after she was asleep, watching her breathe, marveling at the miracle of this second chance he'd been given. He'd lost so much, his first family, years of his life to grief, his faith in almost everything. But he'd found something too: purpose, connection, love. The locket rested against his chest, warm from his body heat. Soon it would be replaced with something larger, something that held everyone he loved. Past and present, loss and hope, all woven together in the story of his life. Eric stood quietly and walked to the window. Outside, Redemption Creek slept under a blanket of stars. The church bell tower rose against the sky, a silhouette of the stand they'd made. The lights in distant cabins spoke of families tucked safely in for the night. The mountains stood eternal and strong, holding the valley in their embrace. He'd come here to disappear, to hide from a world that had hurt him too deeply to bear. Instead, he'd found himself again, found his purpose, found his family. The photograph of Lucy arrived in the mail the next week from the photographer who'd taken their picture the day she'd gotten thunder. Eric placed it carefully in the locket beside Anna and Clara's photograph, and the weight felt right, not heavy with grief, but full with love. 1 month later, the new locket arrived from the jeweler. It was larger, more ornate, with room for 4 photographs instead of 2. Eric placed the original photos on one side, Anna, Clara, and Lucy together. On the other side, he placed a photograph Maggie had insisted on taking. Eric and Lucy together, her on his shoulders, both of them laughing at something Samuel had said. But there was still one empty space. Eric puzzled over it for a moment, then understood. He commissioned one more photograph, not of a person, but of a place. The photographer captured Redemption Creek from the hillside above town, showing the valley, the church, the buildings, the mountains beyond. It was home. It was community. It was everything they'd fought for. When he placed that final photograph in the locket, it was complete. Past and present, people and place, loss and love, all together. All part of the story. He showed it to Lucy that evening, opening the locket to reveal all the photographs. "It's perfect," she breathed, tracing each image with a careful finger. "It's all of us. Everyone who matters. Everyone who matters," Eric agreed. She looked up at him, her eyes serious. "Papa, are we done now? Done with bad things happening?" "I can't promise that, Lucy. Life is full of unexpected things, good and bad. But I can promise this: whatever comes, we face it together, as a family. And we don't run anymore. We stand, she repeated, liking the sound of it. That night, as Eric lay in his bed in the small cabin, listening to Lucy's soft breathing from the next room, he felt something he hadn't felt in 10 years. Peace, not the absence of trouble, but the presence of something stronger than trouble. Love, family, home, purpose. He touched the locket, feeling all the photographs inside, all the people and places that had shaped him, broken him, and remade him into someone stronger. "I made it," he whispered to Anna, to Clara, to the universe itself. "I'm home. Finally, I'm home." Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a sound like distant voices. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called, and another answered. And in a small cabin on the edge of Redemption Creek, a father and daughter slept peacefully, protected not by walls or guns, but by the simple, unbreakable bonds of family. The Viking had found his redemption. Marshal Eric Thornton had found his peace. And Lucy Thornton, formerly an orphan, now a daughter, had found her forever home. The story of Redemption Creek would be told for years to come. How a dying town had stood against impossible odds and won. How a broken man had learned to love again. How a scared little girl had found the courage to call a stranger Papa, and in doing so, had saved them both. But for Eric and Lucy, the story was simpler than that. It was just a story of family, of choosing each other, of keeping the promises that mattered most. And every time Eric opened that locket and saw the photographs inside, all his families, past and present, united in silver and memory, he remembered the simple truth that had brought him through. Family isn't always born. Sometimes it's made in moments of courage, love, and sacrifice. And once made, it's unbreakable.